Welcome, friends. I'm Kevin Miller, your host, guide, and fellow traveler, as we unearth what drives us, when we know what drives us, and why we get where we want to go. This episode, how to understand and leverage the 25 attributes that drive your ultimate performance, your optimal performance. I've forever had my paradigm shifted with a new category of attributes. So what are attributes? They are inherent qualities you possess. We all do. And they inform everything we do. So here's the story. Rich Diviney, he spent 20 years as a Navy SEAL, completing more than a dozen overseas deployments, 11 in Iraq and in Afghanistan. He went on to be intimately involved in a specialized SEAL selection process to look for elite performers amongst the already elite SEAL members. You'll hear him talk about that, how nuts it was to take the best of the best and still get rid of, most of them, except a select few from that. But what he found was that he was surprised by which candidates, even at that high level, washed out and which ones succeeded. So often someone with all the right skills would fail, while others that he might have initially dismissed would turn out to be the best performers. So this led Rich to researching and discovering what are the hidden drivers of performance. Attributes. They'll often predict how we will perform, especially as you're going to hear under pressure. Now, we may not be under the same pressure as a Navy SEAL, but we all have pressure and it brings out our attributes. So I read through Rich's book. He's got a new book called The Attributes, 25 Hidden Drivers of Optimal Performance. Then I took his attributes quiz, and we started off in the discussion talking about what drove him to pursue being a Navy SEAL. I mean, that's a story in and of itself. But then he discussed how the attributes differ from skills, and in truth, they eclipse them, which is massively interesting. Then we walked through all 25 attributes, literally, and I'm confident that you're going to hear brand new perspectives on attributes like courage and situational awareness, task switching, cunning, and even narcissism, which he says has a place in top performance. So again, I feel I've got a whole new toolbox for understanding, predicting, and growing my own performance. I'm going to encourage, again, we're going to give you the best that we can right here on the show, whether you get the book or not, or whether you take the attributes quiz, but I encourage you to check it out. And he's given us a deal on it. If you go to hub.theattributes.com, you can create an account and use code Miller15, my last name, Miller, L-L-E-R, Miller15, to get 15% off your own assessment. So hub.theattributes.com, create an account and use code Miller15 to get 15% off your own assessment. And folks, as you are listening to the show, if you've got questions, thoughts, ideas, let me know. Let me know. Email me, Miller@kevinmiller.co. I would love to hear from you. All right, next up, I'm with Rich Diviney talking about attributes. Well, Rich, I was incredibly excited to get recommended to you by Kristen Hadid. We'll talk about that since she has been on the show not that long ago. And she said, oh my gosh, you got to talk to Rich. And then when I saw you and saw the people you're connected with, Huberman and Simon Sinek and Stephen Kotler and whatnot, I knew we were speaking each other's language. It was great to connect with you. And now that I've dug really into your stuff, I just, it's such a different, I have not seen a different take on some of these aspects. I mean, you call them attributes. And I at first thought, oh, that's a different way of looking at things. But no, that's stands alone. It's kind of set aside. And I have not, in all my years and the 250 books and guests here, I've not heard it addressed this way. So just excited. It opened a new door for me. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here, Kevin. And I'm appreciative and excited for our conversation. So thanks for having me.
I am too. And I've got so much I want to address, but I do want to start in. My interest is always, in what drives people, which again, I love that. It's such a key part of your book and of your message. But it's always interesting to look at a guy like you. I've had people ask me, how'd you end up being a pro cyclist? Where did that come from? And it's a weird story.
Yeah.
And I look at you and go, okay, not everybody goes towards being a SEAL. We see it in the movies, we hear about it, but you actually did it. That didn't come out of nowhere.
Right.
So even back and looking at, I'm wondering, okay, what was childhood like? Obviously you were exposed to the military in that aspect at some degree, But even looking at childhood, do you look back and go, yeah, I can see the seeds of what drove me this direction, or
Yeah.
was it out of the blue?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I think it's always funny for me to kind of go back and think about it because I joined the Navy back in 1996, and very few people knew what Navy SEALs were back then. It's only recently that the popularity has soared. But ultimately, I grew up. I had a nice upbringing in Connecticut. Twin brother, younger brother, and older sister. Had a really nice upbringing. My dad, who was a lawyer, also was a private pilot. He liked to fly. And so we used to go flying together as kids, and we just loved it, especially my twin brother and I. We loved flying. And so it was very early on that we decided we wanted to fly for a living. And of course, the first place, you look at is the military, right? You'll get to fly jets. My two favorite books growing up were The Right Stuff, which is by Tom Wolfe, great book, and then Chuck Yeager's autobiography, Yeager. And I remember all I wanted to do was be a World War II fighter pilot. That was my dream. And so of course we were bent towards flying. We had one of our cousins, our older cousins, had joined the Navy and was a Navy pilot. And we realized, wait a second, the Navy guys, they land on ships. I mean, that's pretty badass. It doesn't really get much harder than that. So let's go for the Navy. So yeah, I mean, this was early 80s, pre-Top Gun. My brother and I were kind of bent on joining the Navy and becoming fighter pilots, and kind of went that direction. I ended up at Purdue University with a Navy ROTC scholarship. However, I got there in 91, 92. It was after the first Gulf War, which was in the 90s, and I happened upon a Newsweek magazine that had on a cover, it said America's Secret Warriors. And it was a 20-page article on all of the Spec Ops units, Marine Recon, Green Berets, SEALs, Air Force, CCTs and PJs, Rangers. And I remember looking at this article, and what struck me about this article is, first of all, it was kind of cool because, you always love the kind of the James Bond Spec Ops type stuff. But what was really cool is there was in that article about 20 or 30 pictures of these Spec Ops guys in different environments: underwater, snow, desert, jungle. And out of the 25 pictures, like 20 of them were all SEALs, but they were just in different environments. I was like, these Navy SEALs, they seem to do everything. They're like everywhere. And I realized SEAL stands for sea, air, land. They were kind of everything. And so I was like, that's kind of cool. And that kind of keyed me into that whole profession, which again, like we said, not many people knew what SEALs were. I had to kind of dig around for books about SEALs back then. It came down to when I graduated around 1996. Before you graduate, you choose a commissioning, or you choose a pathway. You say, what's your preferred pathway in the Navy? And so you say, first choice, second choice, third choice. And I kind of said to myself, I knew that I could be a Navy pilot. I knew I could. There was no question. But I didn't want to be a pilot and always wonder if I could have been a SEAL. And so basically I said, what, I'm going to try for SEALs. And that's what I did. And I fortunately got a billet, which was still difficult back at the time because, it is competitive. But, showed up to Navy SEAL training in 1996 and made it through. 170 students started and only 38 of us graduated. And so began a 21-year career in the SEAL team. So I think
I still want to go back and look, though, when you think about it now and think about yourself as a kid, and to see that, even like that, you kind of take it like, oh yeah, so my dad was into flying. We were interested. So of course we thought military. Well, in my economy as a kid, I probably never would have. I mean, there was my grandparents were Amish. So I couldn't have been further from the military. I might have thought if I had gotten exposed to flying, like, oh, maybe I should be like a commercial jet, pilot and wear a suit and whatnot. And, so one, the exposure is interesting that took you military. And then two, though, it's obviously I don't know how to frame it. I mean, your brother, somewhere there was a high performance bent. Was there a competitiveness? Were you a kid that went after sports? You were competitive. I know it's one of the questions in your assessment.
Right.
Attributes. Did you find, yeah, I was pretty competitive. I always wanted to push myself. Was that true?
Yeah, ironically, no, I've never been competitive. And we can talk about that. We can talk about competitiveness as an attribute because it's a very interesting one, but I've never been competitive. So, and we can talk about, I have a certain take on whether or not people compete with themselves. I don't necessarily term it that way. I think there's competition with others, but there's also an inner drive. that allows us to push ourselves. I think for us, there was first of all, the introduction, my dad took us flying. So obviously we were into flying. The coolest type of flying as we kind of looked at it were the jets. And the commercial jets are great, but what's cooler than an F-16 or an F-18? That was really cool. But I think it's also this, there was also this kind of drive to be something different and special. There was no one in our town or around us that was interested in the military. And so I think that's distinguished it a little bit for ourselves as well. It was a very unique choice, especially the fact that we had chosen it so early. I mean, in high school, everybody knew that the Diviney boys wanted to go to the military and fly jets in our high school. It was kind of unique. So I think that was a driving factor. And I think the other driving factor, which this one in particular has continued to push me throughout my entire life, but started early, was I had this real sense of trying things, and in the act of trying things, recognizing that the people around me were way better than I was. And I call it kind of a healthy imposter syndrome. That kind of healthy imposter syndrome drove me to do better in that whatever endeavor I was. So the first time this happened to me, for example, was I decided in high school I was going to play lacrosse. I wanted to. I never played lacrosse, right? But back then, and I know you could relate. Back when we were in school, you could start playing. You could walk on the lacrosse team, freshman year of high school, having never played before. Nowadays, you have to start. If you don't start by 5th grade, you're probably not going to make the team, right?
Yeah.
So I walked on the lacrosse team, having never played before, and began playing and practicing and doing the best I could. And by senior year, was made captain of the team. And so. And it was all because I kind of looked around me and said, boy, these people are really good. They're way better than me. I need to step up my game. And what's interesting is that that same thing happened when I hit the beaches of SEAL training, and I saw the people around me. It's like, man, these people are way better than me. And then I graduated after, 170 guys started and there's only 38 of us left. And I said to myself, man, what is it about me that causes me to still be here? Right. That healthy imposter syndrome carried out through my entire career. As I do something or be part of a new team or try out for something different, I'd always look around like, man, these people are so much better than me. I have to up my game. And so part of what has always driven me, even coming out of the military and writing a book, guys like Stephen Kotler and Simon Sinek and Huberman, when it comes to neuroscience, like, man, I'm just going to surround myself with people who are way better than me, and it will up my game. And so one of my primary driving factors is this idea that I try to get myself around people who I really feel are better than me. And it's worked so far.
Well, and speaking to what you just did, the competitiveness, would you say that I hadn't thought about it really in that light? I mean, I am what they would call a competitive person, but you just separated it between competing with others and competing with self. And as I think about that, and you talked about it too, when, gosh, I'm going to reference a part of your book. Yeah. It was actually you're the first person that somewhat cites narcissism with some positive aspects.
Right. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Because I definitely have some. And you talked about that when you're laying on the beach, getting beat up, on the surf training or whatever. There wasn't much there that was glorified other than I just want to make it. I don't want to quit. Yeah. And that was a kind of a competing with yourself, which, man, I totally relate to that. Yeah. Now I also, had competing with others as part of a cyclist. I want to be on the podium and I want to be on the top of the podium too. So it was a little bit of both, but I feel like you depict that one or the other doesn't really necessitate the success in certain areas.
Yeah. So let's just talk about competitiveness. Yeah. I think it's one of the most interesting ones. And competitiveness as an attribute, what we have to realize is that competitiveness has to do with a strong desire to succeed or win, right? In competition, there is, in fact, a winning and a losing aspect, okay?
Right.
And so what happens is the highly competitive person, the person who's high on competition or competitiveness, tends to look at the world that way more often. So it tends to kind of look at a situation or environment and begin to try to immediately understand how they can win or lose in that environment. Well, the only way you can win or lose in an environment is to establish rules, conditions, and standards that define winning or losing, right? So a competitive person, a highly competitive person, is very good at going into an environment and immediately beginning to identify, or in some cases create, rules and conditions inside of which you can define winning and losing. That can be very highly advantageous in many endeavors. And that's why highly competitive people can be very successful. Now, I thought, like I said, I was never competitive growing up. And what's funny is, like, I was the captain of my lacrosse team, like I said. And when we would win or lose, it wouldn't emotionally affect me that much. In fact, sometimes I would fake being upset because I didn't want to look weird in front of my teammates, right? But I wasn't emotionally affected at all. And I was like, what? So what's wrong with me? And then I started thinking about becoming a SEAL. I was like, I wonder if this is going to be a detriment, because it seems like competitiveness is something you have to have a lot of. As soon as I got to SEAL training, I recognized that it was no factor, right? Because the SEAL teams, as do most high performing teams, there are certainly exceptions, but the SEAL teams honor both polarities, because what happens is the non-competitive mind walks into an environment or a situation and basically says there are no rules. There's nothing in here that I have to win or lose. All I have to do is understand where I want to go, objectives, outcomes, and do what I need to do. But in terms of rules, don't tell me rules. I'm just going to do what I need to do. And so the reason why that can be advantageous, especially in the special operations world, is that certainly sometimes there can be some missions that are fairly black and white. I mean, it's fairly clear what winning and losing looks like, okay? But in a lot of special operations missions, we don't play by the rules. We look outside the rules. We look around the rules. The majority of Spec Ops guys and SEALs, in fact, don't like to be told rules. We don't like to be told what to do. We always are looking for ways to break or bend rules. And so both of these mental polarities can be very advantageous depending on how you approach the world. You can see in extreme cases, and we could pick any of these attributes. Any of these attributes in extreme cases can be a bad thing. Extremely competitive people are not fun people to be around, right? They're the people who, I kind of joke, they're like let's do a kick in the nuts competition, right? No one wins that, right?
Yeah,
but the competitive person will tell you how they win or lose, right? Now, that's it can be a problem, right? If you're way too non-competitive, well, there's no push, there's no drive to look outside and say, "Ooh, I want to do better, I want to be better." But I think to honor both polarities is really advantageous for someone to understand how they approach and view the world and why they approach and view the world. The last example I'll give, because it really, as I was thinking about this, it kind of helped drive it home for me. I got out of the Navy and I was immediately into the leadership space. I was working with my buddy Simon Sinek, and we were doing leadership stuff, and I was in that space and I enjoyed it. I thought I had stuff to contribute. When I began to look at branching out on my own, the obvious recommendation from people was like, hey, you should do something around leadership. But I looked at the space and I said to myself, well, the leadership space right now is pretty saturated and there's a lot of good stuff in there. There's a lot of good people doing good things. I have no interest in competing with that. None whatsoever. I'm going to go into the performance space. I want to do this thing. I'm going to go into this angle. And so that type of thinking led me down the path I'm going. And it's a path I love doing. Because it's just new, it's fresh. There's no rules, there's no conditions, there's no boundaries. So the idea is wherever you fall on the competitiveness scale, it's not a bad thing, right? You just have to understand. Understanding where you fall can start to identify and help you understand your behavior with much more fidelity.
Okay, there's so much. I'm going to come back to that because we're getting in. I want to do justice at the forefront here of helping people understand what the attributes are. And it's interesting, again, just talking about a SEAL, if to the uneducated or unexposed person like myself, other than the movies and whatnot, I mean, you look at it being a SEAL and you think, oh, it's just, whoever can suffer the most. Well, then I thought, well, no, I was a pro cyclist. You can suffer a lot and be really stupid.
Yes.
So it's not that, obviously. But looking at, let's back into drive again too. When you look and I'm not going to make this all about just SEALs, but to look at that too, let's dispel maybe some of the myths of what a SEAL is, even if you look at what drives most guys. So when you did that and there was, 100 and some people and you ended up with, 38, whatever, here are these SEALs, what would you say, what is driving them? Because I could look at it and go, okay, personal performance, or they're really, justice or ego. or duty
Yeah,
or
yeah.
whatnot? What are some of the common denominators that say, okay, this is what I noticed is a thread that drives these guys?
Yeah, I think it certainly can shift for every person, right? Every SEAL, every guy who makes it through might have slightly different, certainly levels of what drives them. However, there are some commonalities, and I think one of the commonalities that drives people to initially go for something like Navy SEALs is in fact narcissism. And I know we're going to get into narcissism as an attribute and the positives and the negatives of that, but this idea that I want to stand out, I want to do something that very few people can do, right? I want to be, just be something that very few people are. That's probably one primary driver that gets people to the beaches of BUDS, which is, by the way, for the audience, BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition / SEAL Training. That's the 6-month training course that guys go through to become Navy SEALs. 90% attrition rate, by the way, at BUDS, right? So, but that's one of the primary drivers that gets you to BUDS. Once you hit BUDS, however, on day one, you are immediately taken to zero. So narcissism goes away completely because you do not feel special at all, right? So you have to start thinking, okay, what's driving you at that point? Another driver for many of us is this idea that we really don't want to look bad in front of our teammates or in front of others, right? So we will actually push ourselves in ways that go maybe even beyond what we thought we could do because we don't want to be the guy who quits, right? We don't want to be that guy. That's another thing that's another driver. I think a drive to succeed and accomplish the endeavors, right, that you're sought out to accomplish, right? And again, I'm trying to keep those drivers in some ways small because while patriotism and serving your country certainly fall into the mix, you don't necessarily think about that when you're in the meat of just horrible, nitty gritty, cold SEAL training. You just don't think it doesn't those types of big kind of horizon, like over the horizon level drivers don't really affect you. You're always kind of leaning back on some of those smaller things, right? So the drive to succeed, the drive to complete this task that in the moment that I'm going to do, the drive to make it to the next meal are all many drivers. And then I think there are some guys who would say, they'd be in the surf zone or whatever, freezing, and they'd look out and see, you're in San Diego, so you're looking out of the ocean, and they'd see those Navy ships out there on the horizon. They'd be like, I do not want to be on one of those ships. Like, there's no way I want to be on one of those ships. I'm not quitting because I don't want to be on one of those ships. So that can be a driver for people as well. So, so I think there's a lot that goes into the equation of what drives guys both to get there and then drives guys to get through. And I think it's a combination of all those things, probably plus many more that I probably couldn't identify. I'd have to ask others.
The narcissism thing, not to stick on that, but It is curious to me. It was as I was reading your stuff, Rich, about I'm going to call it self-interest, because you have selflessness as one of the one of the aspects of attributes that we're about to get into. But as I looked at that, so one of the philosophers that I really like and follow is a guy no longer living, Anthony DeMello.
Mm-hmm.
And he really takes the task selflessness.
Yeah.
That's this altruistic ideal that we have out there. And he says, man, at the end of the day, there's nobody who's selfless. Everybody's doing it for something that means something to them. And I think it mattered to me because I felt, coming from a religious background, that people tried to do things that were selfless. And I thought, man, if there's not some self-interest, I didn't see them stick. I didn't see it being sustainable. They wouldn't commit and go to it. So it's interesting here that even as we have the SEALs, we say, oh my gosh, they're out there saving the world. You say they are, and they're doing it for some personal reasons too. Seems fair. I
agree. And I actually, the way I describe selflessness in the book and as an attribute, I actually stay away from the reward element of it. In other words, I certainly concede that selfless acts, even if it's a giving one's life, there's a reward to, hey, I'm doing something for someone else, right?
Right.
The way I define selflessness as an attribute is, and I kind of, in the book I don't do this. It's because in the book I only talk about 25 attributes, but with the all 42 we can do this. But I I kind of relate it to generosity. Okay. And when you start relating these attributes, these are types of attributes I call metonyms. In other words, they're attributes that seem synonymous. People think of them, they get conflated as synonymous, but they are in fact not. Right. And so the reason why generosity and selflessness are different is because generosity is the ability to give more than is expected or anticipated. Right. A generous act would be, but the caveat is there's no real risk to oneself, right? So the caveat would be you and I, or the example would be you and I are walking down the street and we see a homeless person and we say, okay, we're going to give the homeless person $20, right? It's generous for sure. No real risk to us, right?
Right.
Selflessness involves risk to that human being. So it's an act to, it's the ability to give to someone else, but at a level of risk or threat to that individual, right? So that's like, okay, we give the homeless person $20. Now the homeless person takes that $20, runs over to another homeless person, and gives that homeless person the $20. Now that person is giving some sort of, they're risking, there's some sort of risk or loss. Right? That's selflessness. So selflessness is you are giving to another human being at some sort of risk or loss to yourself, whereas generosity is you're giving to another person and there's no real risk or loss, right, at that. So I think, and so neither of those, or excuse me, both of those can come with a feeling of reward, right? You know, but one comes with some risk. And so the real poignant example of my buddy Simon Sinek told me, he actually used this on one of his posts. I remember he said if you were imagine you were moving. Okay, and you had two friends, and one of the friends calls you and says, "Hey, listen, I heard you're moving, and I want to help out. So I'm gonna donate $1,000. I'm gonna give you $1,000 to help with your moving expenses." And she's like, "Oh man, that's really nice, cool." The other friend calls and says, "Hey, I hear you're moving. I don't have any money to give, but I'm going to actually show up to your house. I'm going to help you load up the truck. I'm going to drive with you to the new place. I'm going to help you unload and unpack the truck." Right. 3 months later, both friends ask you to do a favor right at the same time. Which one are you probably going to do the favor for first? It's the one who actually helped you, who actually was because time and effort are gives, right? You're giving something up, right? Whereas the money is just the money, right? So it's a good example of the difference between generosity and selflessness.
Yeah, it's interesting. DeMello would look at that and go, they're both self-interest, but one's more evolved.
Maybe so.
Got more risk in it. Well, just to hit the attributes.
Okay.
I mean, right off the bat, you had me with, because as I looked at attributes, I was trying to back off and go, okay, how have I defined that for myself? If you would have given me that word prior to reading your book, I would have thought, man, attributes, gosh, probably like my character, my morality, maybe. And maybe I might have said skills. And you do a great job of separating attributes from skills. And man, my quick layman's term thought is I can have the skills. You talk about it. The skills, what is I know how to do something, but can I do it when it really counts, especially when the pressure's on, whatever. So I may have the skill, like you use, football to throw an accurate pass. I may have the skill to do whatever, but can I do it when it really gets tough? And that's where you then back into attributes, but give everybody a definition of the difference there, because I think you've now forever changed a kind of a category of description of a person into attributes that I wasn't aware of.
Well, it's fascinating to me because, again, I was trying to think of what are those, again, elemental drivers. I'm kind of interested in elemental human performance. In other words, who are we at our most raw, right? Who's that person that shows up? And so this is so I kind of backed into this because I was running training for I was running SEAL selection and assessment for one of our very specialized SEAL commands, where we had this particular command. You had top SEALs from all the other teams come and try out for our team, and you put them through a whole selection process. And then there's only about 50% who make it through, right? So 50% of the top dudes do not make it. And as someone who had made it through and now running training, I was tasked with the job of trying to articulate why guys weren't making it through. And basically we had up to that point was like, well, this guy couldn't shoot very well, or couldn't skydive very well. But you tell a SEAL of that caliber they can't shoot very well. I mean, that says this is a guy who's probably shot more rounds than most people in the military, right? It's disingenuous.
Well, and if I can interject, I really appreciated your story on this, because you said, man, if we're here and we are rejecting some of the top guys, if we do that too much, it can call into question your own testing to the higher ups.
Well, it already had. In other words, we were starting to get some difficult questions from the higher ups saying, hey, what's going on there? We see these top dudes. Why the heck did that guy not make it? And to tell someone like that, an admiral, and say, well, he couldn't shoot very well. It's like, okay, you got to do better than that, right? And so I was tasked with articulating what we had going on. They said, Rich, you need to look at what we're doing and try to articulate what we're doing. This is when I began to think about this attribute stuff. And one of the things I did to discover that was I went to basic SEAL training. I visited my buddy who was running BUDS in San Diego. And I told him what I was looking at. And he said, well, listen, I think I don't know, I'm not sure how I can help you with your particular problem, but I think what we're trying to look at is we're trying to look at those qualities that people have as to whether or not they have what it takes to do the job. Not if they know how to do the job, if they have what it takes to do the job, right? And so that began to hit me, and I started thinking about it, and I said to myself, okay, well, let me think about this. But when I was doing this work for the selection course, it was about 2010, all right? I went through SEAL training in 1996. When you go through SEAL training, when you go through BUDS, again, it's a 6-month course, 90% attrition rate. You spend hundreds of hours, for example, running around with big, heavy boats on your head. You spend hundreds of hours running around with 300-pound telephone poles and exercising with those things, and then freezing in the surf zone. And by 2010, I had done hundreds of combat missions overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I can tell you with certainty, never on one of those missions did I ever carry a heavy boat on my head or a 300-pound telephone pole, right? So what they were doing to us in SEAL training was not training us to be Navy SEALs. They were pulling out they were teasing out these qualities to see if we had what it took. So that was the first thing. And then the other example that hit me, and this was a story that was relayed to me years prior, and I just had recalled it at the time. The story goes, and this happened before I went to SEAL training, but the story goes, this kid one day shows up to Navy SEAL training, and he walks into the instructor's offices, and he says, I want to be a Navy SEAL. And the instructors say, okay, well, you have to do a swim test first. And the kid says, okay. And so they take him out to the pool. Now, it's an easy swim test, like 50 meters. So 25 meters to one end, 25 meters back to the other end. Kid gets all ready. He jumps in the pool. When he jumps in the pool, he sinks right to the bottom of the pool, right? And he starts walking across the bottom of the pool to one end. He touches that end. He walks across the bottom of the pool back to the other end. He comes up. He's gasping for air, right? Nearly drowning. And the instructor looks at him and says, what the hell are you doing? And the kid, who's still trying to get his breath, looks at the instructor and says, I'm sorry, instructor, I don't know how to swim. At that point, the instructor looks at the kid and pauses and looks at the kid and says, that's okay, we can teach you how to swim, right? And the question is, why did the instructor say that? The instructor said that because he knew if this kid had the attributes, these qualities, these traits to show up to Navy SEAL training, and he didn't know how to swim, he had everything inside of him to become a Navy SEAL. Teaching him to swim was going to be easy, right? So this is when I began to separate skills and attributes, and to really kind of put it as succinctly as possible. Skills are not inherent to our nature. None of us are born with the ability to ride a bike or throw a ball or shoot a gun, right? We're trained to do those things. We're taught to do those things. Skills direct our behavior in known and specific environments. Here's how and when to throw a ball or ride a bike or shoot a gun. And then finally, skills, because they're very visible, they're very easy to assess, measure, and test. You can see how well anybody does any one of those things, right? You can put scores around them and stats around them. You can put them on resumes, which is why we get seduced by skills a lot of times when we're picking teams or even hiring people, right? Skills, though, don't tell us how we're going to show up in stress, challenge, and uncertainty, because in an unknown environment, it's very difficult to apply a known skill. This is when we lean on our attributes, okay? Attributes are different. Attributes are inherent to our nature, okay? All of us, in other words, are born with levels of patience, situational awareness, adaptability, resilience. Okay, now we can certainly develop those over time and experience, but you can see levels of this stuff in very small children. Okay, any of us, I know you and I know this, but any of us who are in the audience who have kids or have experienced kids will agree with me when I say there are 1.5-year-olds who are patient and there are 1.5-year-olds who are impatient. Okay, so there's a nature-nurture element to attributes. Attributes don't direct our behavior. Attributes inform our behavior. They tell us how we're going to show up to an environment, right? So, in other words, my son's levels of resilience and perseverance informed how he showed up when he was learning the skill of riding a bike, and he was falling off a dozen times doing so, all right? Finally, because they're difficult to see, they're very difficult to measure and assess. How do we measure someone's levels of adaptability or resilience? Okay. They show up the most viscerally and visibly during times of stress, challenge, and uncertainty, because that's when it's hard to lean on the skills, right? We're leaning on these attributes so we can start figuring out the environment and moving inside of these environments of uncertainty. So they are operating all the time. And if we're not considering attributes as part of the performance picture, we're missing a huge, if not the most important part of what drives our performance in every environment, but especially during stress, challenge, and uncertainty.
Okay, let me ask that, so I get you on skills.
Yeah.
So none of us, grew up and we immediately knew how to ride a bike. We were taught that,
yeah,
or to throw a ball, or to do algebra or whatever. So we're taught those. On the attributes, play with that with me. I mean, it's, basic question, nature versus nurture.
Yeah.
I think I have looked at it. I have a lot of kids, and was definitely set back somewhat on my nature versus nurture to see them. I mean, they popped out, like you said, more patient, less patient, more outgoing, less outgoing, whatever. And they popped out like that. Yet their exposure is me. And I'll go back even to my own, as we get into the specifics here, like grit and perseverance, so let's say that I had a propensity for that.
Yeah.
It also fit the structure. I grew up in an entrepreneurial home, and you were given tasks and you were expected to do them.
Yeah, yeah.
And I realized really early that my work ethic was much more elevated than my peers.
Yeah.
I attributed it to that. They may have not had to do chores or had to do business or whatever. And I remember starkly being left with these overwhelming chores. I look back now and I think, man, that was near abusive. But I learned to see it through. Yeah. I also learned that, man, if you just go in and you keep going, at some point you finish. Yeah. And so I look at that as a trained, I have looked at that more like a skill than an attribute. So play with me on there on kind of the nature versus nurture.
Yeah. So I will concede that that experience and environment have a lot to do and can have a lot to do with the development of attributes. Okay. The key though is that they don't necessarily have to. So in other words, the great example would be the military brat, right? The kid who's born with military parents and they're born low on adaptability, for example. Okay. But as someone with two parents in the military, they're moving every 2 years, right? So moving every 2 years, changing schools, changing environments, they slowly begin to become adaptable. Okay. So their adaptability increases. They develop their adaptability from that environment and experience. However, that's not always the case, right? Someone could be going through that because someone could be low on adaptability and go through all that and have a miserable time their whole entire lives, right? So what I'm saying is that it doesn't necessarily, just because you're in an environment doesn't mean you're going to necessarily develop it. It certainly could. Now, when it comes to grit, and I know we're going to talk about it, grit is a category. It's not an attribute. Grit is a combination of attributes, right? Okay. So what causes the grittiness are things like courage, perseverance, adaptability. Mental acuity attributes such as compartmentalization. What you talked about just now, you had a big job. You had these huge, enormous tasks. I relate to you because same thing happened to us when we were kids. My dad used to make us. He used to tell us to move big piles of wood because he used to like burn wood fires for heat in the house. And so he'd have big, huge piles of wood delivered and we'd have to move it up to the front house and stack it, and it took forever, but we just got really good at just going wheelbarrow by wheelbarrow and just focusing on one thing after just one step at a time. This is compartmentalization. This is the ability to compartmentalize. That is an attribute. And so I think what happens is we have combinations of these attributes that begin to catalyze and stew and blend and get exercised depending on our environment. And in some cases, it just helps us explode in certain directions. In other cases, it may inhibit us. And in other cases, it may allow us to develop certain things, right? But I think it's important to understand there's nature, nurture elements. And if you're low on one, you can certainly develop it. You're not stuck there.
Well, and right there, I mean, that's got to be there's the driver of the show right there. I don't think anybody's here to just get a masterclass on what attributes are, but it's how can I grow? Can I grow? Yes. Can I change that? So some of them, there's a lot of inherent, you're saying there's a lot of predisposition, propensity, genetics. We can talk about all that in there, but can I look at this? Can I go take the attributes quiz, look at it, and then realize growth in the areas that I care to.
Yes.
And it was interesting as I did mine too. There may be some that I look at it and go, well, I may divulge that if I feel that much candor, but there are some areas I thought I'm kind of low there and I'm kind of good at that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It depends on what you want to do.
Right.
And not all of us want the attributes that would enable us to be a SEAL. We may want to be a, whatever that
100%.
is. But that's the point, is looking, what are the attributes for a successful blank position?
Yes.
And then you're saying, yes, you can grow and progress towards those.
Yeah. What are the attributes required for your specific niche or desire in life, right? And that, because those attributes are going to change. I kind of think about us as human beings, kind of like the movie Cars. Okay, all of us are different types of cars, right? Some of us are Jeeps, some of us are SUVs, some of us are Ferraris, right? And there's no judgment there, because the Ferrari can do things the Jeep can't do, and the Jeep can do things the Ferrari can't do. However, we need to lift our hood and figure out what kind of engine we're running with, because we might be the tension in our lives might be because we've been a Jeep trying to run on a Ferrari track, or a Ferrari trying to run on a Jeep track, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. You could be a Jeep that wants to run on a Ferrari track. But knowing you're a Jeep is going to help you considerably do better on that Ferrari track, right? Because every vehicle has its own unique things that it brings to that driving situation. So just like human beings as attributes, we are, all of us, I always kind of talk about, all of us have all of the attributes. We all have all of them. But the difference in each one of us are the levels to which we have each, right? So, for example, I use adaptability. Adaptability, if 10 is high and 1 is low. I'm probably a level 8 on adaptability, which means when the environment changes around me outside of my control, it's fairly easy for me to go with the flow and roll with it, okay? Someone else might be a level 3 on adaptability, which means the same thing happens to them. It's difficult for them to go with the flow and roll with it, right? They're still adaptable because human beings are, right? But they're just lower on adaptability. It's harder. There's more friction there.
Right.
So if we line these attributes up on a wall like dimmer switches, all of us have different dimmer switch settings. And that starts to speak to our individual performance, especially during times of stress, challenge, and uncertainty. And just because you're low on one doesn't mean you can't develop it, right? You can actually, but you have to know you're low on it so that you make the effort to develop it.
It's interesting when you talk about adaptability, Rich, that even looking at, I was about to ask you a question. I'll back into it with myself. So I was a pro cyclist. I was always an athlete, then a cycling career that went a long time. And I apparently had the attributes necessary to do that. And it fit well. I took those same attributes into the rest of my life initially, and only to realize, oh, not all of life is like pro cycling.
Right.
Like relationships. Pro cycling, it's great to have great endurance, be able to suffer, and just, no matter what, you just keep going. It doesn't work so well in relationships. I need to change that, but I took that over there so that, and because I was thinking about that, because I was about to ask you, okay, so you realized you had the attributes to be a Navy SEAL. You did your career there, and at some point you retired, came into civilian life. I'd imagine there's some things, some wake-up calls that you had to go, oh, this is not the life of a SEAL.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And you're going to have to adapt with some different attributes. Fair?
Yes. Well, 100%. And I think, one of the ones immediately that comes to mind is collaboration. Collaboration is an attribute. I don't talk about it in the book because it's one of the other 42. It's not one of the 25 I talk about in the book, but this collaboration, this collaborative attribute, some people are just designed to just work better with other people, right? And there are other people who just they're just more designed to be on their own. They're just better off on their own. I have always been a high collaborative person. I've been high on collaboration. I enjoy and I work very well with other people. It made the SEAL teams perfect for me because everything about the teams is collaborative, right? I didn't do any individual sports when I was a kid, right? I had no interest in it. I always liked being part of a team thing, right? Because I'm just very collaborative. You get out of the Navy and suddenly you're in this environment where you want to do your own thing and there's no more team, right? You're just like, okay, that was a huge thing for me. I was like, okay, who do I collaborate with on this, And so, obviously my wife has been my teammate for the last 23 years. My family's my team. I began to look at and lean on friends and mentors like Huberman and Simon and Kotler in terms of mentorship. But it was a real adjustment because I no longer had that team environment. I had to get very used to working outside of the team environment so that I may adjust and do my own thing. So it's an example of understanding how these attributes you can if you know where you are in them, you start to understand how you might adjust better to whatever niche you're dropping into so that you can perform better and be a better Jeep on that Ferrari track should you choose to be.
Yeah, I love that analogy. Rich, I use that in my book because my claim is we all have drive. We all have the ingredients of drive. And it's just like you say, we all have the attributes, but they may come in different shapes and sizes and depends on, what you want to do with that. Okay, it's interesting on the attributes. So I'll call out my best friend from high school, one of my longest term friends ever, Joe Napier. So military family, dad went to West Point. I think somebody before that came down. Joe went to West Point, his brothers went in the military. So Joe goes in there and at some point they do, would I be right? Ranger school?
That's one of the schools. Yep. If they're in the Army. Yep.
Okay. So he went to that. Explained it to me. He says, "Oh man, Kevin, all this stuff, you would have loved it. I think you would have kicked butt at it, but there's no way you'd ever make it in the military." he understood some of my attributes, and even that. Now you don't go into collaboration so much, but in your assessment, you go into like team ability.
Yeah,
that was one of my lowest. And it's why I left team sports and went to cycling, more so an individual sport. So to look at that and go, because I listened to a lot of this as I was reading, the SEAL stuff, and I think, man, to be a pro cyclist, it was a very elitist. It's one of the most elitist sports out there. And so many of the attributes of that related, and then a bunch of them do not at all. I think I'd look at the attributes of a pro cyclist, let's call it that, over here to a SEAL. I don't think that there's some overlap, but then there's a lot that don't as well.
Well, and I think you're right. But the key is, and I'm also very careful about this, since writing the book, and I will always be, is to not place judgment on any of this stuff. All this stuff I endeavor to help people introspect and define their own performance and behavior. We don't judge it, right? I mean, you have made a huge success with your unique palette of attributes, even though someone might well, you're not a team ability guy. Well, that seems bad. No, you've actually done very well by putting yourself in the niche inside of which you could actually really succeed and excel, and use that to your advantage. And maybe develop this here and there a little bit, just as you need to. But there's no judgment here. It's really, how can we figure out what engine we're running with so we can just do better in what we want to do better in.
Well, and fair. And to that degree, I don't desire to be, it's probably a little late. I don't desire to be a SEAL, at this point, but man, I appreciate so much of that. So we're going to be talking about that. And I'll have said this in the intro, but folks, again, if you go to theattributes.com, that's where the current quiz is. And I don't know when this is going to publish, but then you're saying, okay, it's a quiz. So there's the one that I took that we'll talk about. And you're saying May when? An enhanced one?
Yeah, May 1st, we'll have our enhanced attributes assessments for all 42. And when you take that, you'll get not only your scores for every attribute ranked, like what your top 5, what your bottom 5, what your middle ones, but also what do those top 5 mean, right? What does it mean? What does it mean for you and your behavior to have each one of those top 5? What does it mean for you and your behavior to have the bottom 5? How can you, in fact, if you are low on one, what are some tips and tricks that you can do to develop those, or even enhance the ones you have? So the report will be a good 40, 50 pages of someone who wants to really dive deep into where they fall on these things and either develop or go find teammates that have high attributes so they don't have to develop it, because that also works.
Well, I love the report. I can't wait to see that, because I want to look at mine. And I found right away, I thought it'd be interesting to see, okay, here is your depiction or showcase of the general results, aptitude results of a SEAL.
Yeah.
Put mine up there and you go, oh yeah, Kevin, you meet this isn't, nope, you're out.
Well, so interesting enough. So, and I think, I have buddies who are still working at SEAL training. Right. And so I keep in touch with them just on a friendly basis. I have not been asked to go out there and look at candidates from an attribute perspective. I'd have to really think about that very specifically, because it is a tough nut to crack. The Navy has been trying to crack the nut of how do we predict who's going to make it through SEAL training for the last 60 years. I have some ideas on what at least a couple of the attributes that are required to make it through, but it is so sometimes random in terms of who makes it and who doesn't, that it'd be I'm going to do it at some point, but it's going to take a lot of time and effort to figure that out. so and the reason why I said is I have a sense that if I look at your attribute profile, there are probably some attributes you're high on that's like, oh yeah, that's totally what same thing that SEALs have, right? And there are others that, might not fit. But just because you were a cyclist doesn't necessarily mean you wouldn't have made it through SEAL training. That's only one data point out of several. Your level of compartmentalization is actually very important in terms of SEAL training. So there's a huge chance that you could have made it through SEAL training had you been through, regardless of where your team ability attributes stand.
Well, and also to be fair, then if I understand you right, so even with all the research you've done, all the guys that you've seen go through, and this was one of your, premise to the book and to the message is you saying, man, so many of the people who I thought would have just killed it didn't.
Yeah.
They failed, and people who I would not have picked. I mean, I can say the same thing with being a lifetime entrepreneur and having led so many and being an entrepreneur. There's a lot of people that right away I judged what I thought to be their attributes. I go, no way, no way, no way. And then lo and behold, a couple of years later, they just killed it. Oh my gosh. And I had to back up and go, what was it about them? Like one of the attributes that I found is that sometimes it's the more self-aware people who are quicker to discount themselves. And some of the people over here, and I'm going to exaggerate the point, they're so dumb they didn't know enough to know they couldn't do it, and they went and did it.
Yeah.
Well, it took me a long time to learn.
Yeah. Well, and one of the biggest mistakes people make, or assumptions people make about SEAL training, for example, is they and I see why, but they make the assumption that athletics and athletic ability has something to do with making it through SEAL training. Athletic ability has nothing to do with making it through SEAL training. Nothing, right? You have to be in shape to make it through SEAL training, and you have to be tough, right? But you don't have to be athletic. Athletic is this ability to kind of do sports and have that hand-eye coordination, all that stuff. That's how I define athleticism, right? You have to be in good shape and you have to be tough. But we would have, on many occasions, Division I athletes come to SEAL training and they quit the first day, right? I mean, so the easy assumption that many people make is they see someone's like, oh, but that person's in really they're a super athlete or whatever, or even in just great shape, right? It's not just being in shape either. It's like, can you go to zero and be at zero and still do something and still perform, right? And so that's why there's such a disparity in who makes it through. You have the kid who grew up on a farm, never played a sport in their life, who makes it through, and the person who is a Division I athlete, has played sports their entire life and won everything, and they quit, right? So you also have Division I athletes that make it through, right? And you have the farm kids who quit, right? So it becomes a very interesting question and challenge to understand what that exact combination is. It'd be a cool endeavor. At some point, I'll dive into it. So,
well, and is it probably fair too to say? So I took the test. So I went to the attributes.com. I took that. Granted, it's self-reporting. So I'm self-reporting one. So we could say, okay, hopefully that shows you a trend.
Yeah.
It should show you a trend, or at least it would show you my mindset. Now we go over, and if you were to say in this instance, stick me in SEAL training or stick me in an intense conference room in the C-suite, whatever, let's see how it really pans out when the crap hits the fan.
Right.
And that's when you see what the real attribute is. Fair?
Yeah. So uncertainty, challenge, and stress are what allow these to show up the most visibly and viscerally. I will say this, though, in terms of self-reporting, when I was writing the book, initially we created the grit, mental acuity, and drive assessment tool. So the grit category, the mental acuity category, and the drive category. I had left out the leadership and team ability categories initially because my thought was with leadership and team ability, I kind of always say being a leader and being in charge are two separate things. One is a position and one is a behavior, right? And the truism I always tell people when I'm speaking, especially on leadership, is that you don't get to self-designate. In other words, you're not allowed to call yourself a leader. That's like calling yourself good looking or funny. Right. Other people decide whether or not you are someone they want to follow, and it's based on the way you behave. Right. So you can be in charge all day long. If people don't look at you as a leader, then you're just the person in charge. Right. So all this to say is the attributes that lend themselves towards leadership and team ability, because the team ability is the same way. You don't get to call yourself a great teammate. Your teammates decide. All those attributes lend themselves to other people's interpretation. So my initial thought was, well, the leadership and team ability attributes need to be a 360 review, right? And so we actually developed a 360 degree assessment for the leadership and team ability attributes. And we put this out. We had a bunch of people take it. And the way this worked was the person who was taking the assessment would take it for themselves, and then they'd send it out to a bunch of raters, and the raters' scores would come back. And you could see the difference between what you thought as an individual and what people thought, right? And we did this, and we did it for several hundred, probably over 1,000 people. And what I did is, because I'm curious. I said, anybody who got this assessment, contact me, and if I have time, I'll be happy to get on a call with you, and I'll talk about the results, because I wanted to see what was going on. So I actually got on a call with a bunch of people who did this, and what I noticed, the most important thing I noticed, is that in most cases, this is 9 times out of 10, the individual's rating of themselves was not much different than the rater's rating of that individual. Right?
Really?
So I wasn't seeing a significant delta between the two perceptions, which told me that, oh, wait a second, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe actually, if the questions are good enough, someone can actually effectively self-assess. And so I think the assessment is designed so that it tries to eliminate as much optimism bias as possible. It's certainly, when you take it, you want to make sure, and we remind people, answer with who you actually are, not who you want to be or who you wish you could be, right? Answer as honestly as you can of who you actually are, so you can get a good read on who you are. That way, if you want to develop, you can. But we're finding that in most cases, it's providing, just that self-assessment is providing a pretty accurate read for people on how they show up in all of these categories. And it's pretty encouraging. And I think that's and that can give you a jump off point to then examine your performance in other environments. You can say, okay, based on my adaptability score, let me think about the last time that the environment was changing around me outside my control. How did I show up? Does that match up? It's like, you know what? It actually does match up. I'm starting to learn something about myself, which is really cool.
It's interesting. We did, I think, well, I don't know when this is going to post, but we just recently did a show with Thais Gibson. She has personal development school, and it's on attachment style. And so I went through her quiz profile thing like this, and I found myself, and I've done a lot of these, granted, that I was really trying to say, okay, who's Kevin, just base self, like kind of lizard brain, just who's my nature, not the modified, like you said, not the what I want to be, not what I'm even striving towards, but just who I know, who I tend to be, like I am naturally, even though I think I exert a lot of patience, with my big family and whatever, I know internally, oh my gosh, I'm dramatically impatient. So answer honestly. Yeah. So is that a fair way to take it?
100%. Answer honestly. Okay. Because again, that's when you get, again, the goal is to get a good, solid read on how you show up, especially at elemental times. When at your most raw, who is that person? Because that's what you're going to default to, and you want to know that honestly. If you default to impatience, I want to know that. If I default to low adaptability, I want to know that. If I default to high compartmentalization, I want to know that. Because only then can you do accurate adjustments on that.
All right. Well, here, I'm going to, as we dive into the specifics here, I'll give you my top 5.
Okay. Yeah.
You ready? Yeah. And it looks like the high is a 7, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I got a 7 on cunning.
Oh, that's great.
Is it? Okay.
We have to explain to the audience why cunning is not pejorative either, but we'll do that here in a second.
Okay. 6.9 on tenacity.
Uh-huh.
Okay. When I should say, and we'll come back to these because I want to try to run through them. So 7 on cunning, which you have as vision.
Yes.
6.9 on tenacity, commitment. 6.9 on introversion in the social intelligence category. Okay. 6.8 on task switching.
Yep.
In mental acuity, and 6.7 in perseverance or grit.
Okay. Perseverance. Yeah. Which is part of the grit. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So, and what were your bottom 5?
I was gonna say.
I'm just writing these down as you tell me, so I can take a look.
Dead last. Okay. Yeah. And yes, this is embarrassing. Dead last. Collaborative.
Okay.
Team ability. 3.1.
Yeah.
3.3 in compassion.
Okay. All right.
Pisses me off, but I know that that's true. I'm trying to grow in that.
Yeah.
3.6. Now this one bothers me. This is the one I don't like the most. I reject this one. Can I take out the look?
Yeah,
this is discernment.
Is what now?
Discernment. Okay.
Well, we'll talk about that. Discernment.
Okay. Because I absolutely would have guessed that I'd be, really high.
Because by the way, I'm low on that as well. So it makes you feel better.
Interesting.
Go ahead.
3.6 in discernment. 3.9. I don't even know how to say what this word is. Insouciance?
Insouciance. Yeah.
Insouciance. I've never heard that word in my life.
Yep. So insouciance. That's a casual lack of concern for what other people think. So the fact that you're low on it means you're higher on what's called fear of rejection, which, by the way, almost every SEAL is higher on fear of rejection. They're low on insouciance, and we can explain why. So,
I'm high on fear of rejection. Yeah. So that's 3.9 on that, and then a 4.0 on patience.
Patience. Okay. All right. Well, so so this becomes really interesting. So let's just talk about a couple of these. All right. So you're high on cunning. Okay. First of all, we have to understand cunning. People think of it as a pejorative word. Cunning, cunning people think of as a negative thing. That's not necessarily true. How we use cunning is that's what can be judged. But cunning can be used benevolently or malevolently. Cunning is simply the ability to think outside the box, right?
I was going to say, my first thought as I read your definition of it in the book is MacGyver.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So the cunning mind basically approaches a problem and immediately thinks three things. The first thing the cunning mind thinks is, or asks three questions. The first question is, are there rules and boundaries, surrounding this problem? The second question is, are they real or are they perceived? And the third question is, if they're real, what happens if I break them? Okay, that's what the cunning mind does. And the cunning mind then seeks to look at ways around the problem. SEALs are obviously very high on cunning. We don't like rules, right? We look for ways around. So now you can have malevolent cunning, that's Bernie Madoff, right? Or you can have benevolent cunning, which is Oscar Schindler, right? So you can use, the way we use cunning can be judged, right? But cunning in itself is a neutral attribute. So the fact that you are high on cunning means you tend to look at problems and situations and start to say to yourself, okay, how can I work? What are outside of the box ways I can attack this thing? Okay, which makes sense. Okay, because sometimes discernment, people who are very discerning, they actually look at and know rules very well. Discernment is all about details and things like that. While the cunning mind doesn't necessarily have a lot of time for details, the cunning mind looks around details because it looks at problems. So the fact that you're high on cunning and a little bit low on discernment makes complete sense to me. If that makes sense to you. Okay. So that's.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I saw that as I went through the profile or the quiz, and there's aspects about details. And I had to be honest, man, I just don't have any place for details. God bless the people that do, like the people that I pay to, so my business actually runs and my taxes get paid and whatnot. But oh my gosh, I have no love personally or skill or interest in details. So for that to take discernment to a low point. Okay.
And by the way, that's like me. I am I'm much better at the big picture strategic stuff. I like strategy. I like big stuff. When it comes to nitty gritty things, I don't have a lot of interest or time for them. So my discernment is also a little bit lower because I will have other people read through contracts for me because they'll pick out things that I was just like, I don't have, that's my low discernment. So there's no judgment here. It's just understanding. Yeah. If I understand I'm low on discernment, if I think I'm high on discernment and I'm not, then I'm going to read a contract. I'm going to miss things, right? If I know I'm low on discernment, then I know to give that contract to someone else so I don't miss something, right? That's the power.
Well, and this is where the benefit comes in. And we look at that and you go, okay, probably not going to be a CPA, Kevin, or a corporate lawyer. 100%. Those are not going to be those are going to rub you wrong. Well, great for me to know so that I don't go down that road.
Now let's take a look at tenacity. You're very high on tenacity. Okay. This is also fun because you're high on tenacity. Tenacity, in terms of pushing through, right? Tenacity is this ability to, or tendency to look at, solving or, looking at a way to do something, a way to accomplish something, trying that. If that doesn't work, you shift approach and try something else. If that doesn't work, you shift approach and try something else, right? It's different than persistence, okay? Persistence, which is also an attribute, is I am going to try something and I know that if I just do this the same way over and over again, I'm going to make it work, right? So persistence is, for example, the stone cutter approach, okay? I'm going to tap that stone in the same place every single, 100 times, nothing's going to happen. But on the 101st tap, that stone's going to break. That's persistence, okay? Tenacity is the car mechanic. I'm going to check the belts. If it's not the belts, I'm going to check the carburetor. If it's not the carburetor, I'm going to check something else. I'm going to keep on changing my approach, okay? You don't want the tenacious stone cutter, okay? Because you'll never get the stone cut. And you don't want the persistent car mechanic because you'll just check the belts over and over again, right? you are more tenacious, right? What's interesting about persistence and tenacity is that persistence requires patience. Tenacity requires impatience, okay? So the fact that you're low on patience and high on tenacity makes perfect sense because you don't have the patience to look at something and say, I'm going to just try this over and over. I'm going to do this. I'm going to try something else. I'm going to do this. I'm going to try something else. Your low patience assists in your high tenacity, right? Now, which can be very advantageous. Where do you have to be careful? You have to be careful because sometimes your low patience and your high tenacity may, in fact, inhibit you to stick to a course of action.
It does. I'm smiling, Rich, because I am called out for this. Just recently by my brother, who's my business partner, Jared, and he's like, oh my gosh, every time we start something, if it doesn't work right away, you just want to try another tactic. Right. Can we stick with one for a little while? And so again, like you're saying, I appreciate that. There's not right or wrong, good or bad, but they're going to lend themselves to others. So I got to look at it and go, okay, my tenacity is good here, but over here, I'm going to have to back off because this one, I'm changing too quick. We haven't even tested it enough, and it may require some perseverance, which I'm not good at. You're unpacking this in ways that I have not seen a lot of these attributes.
Well, and this, by the way, is the argument for teaming, right? The highest performing teams, you start to look at people in your team that can actually supplement the attributes you're a little bit lower on, and you supplement theirs, right? Patience is a great example. So my wife and I, we've been married 23 years, okay? We've been married. We lived through a war together. We have 2 teenage boys, right? We are a high performing team, okay? I am someone who's high on patience, and she is someone who is low on patience, okay? That's worked beautifully in our relationship over the last 23 years because when patience has been required, I step up and I take lead. When impatience is required, she steps up and she takes lead, right? If you have a team full of people who are all too patient, right, you could risk procrastination. Sometimes my wife's impatience pushes me to not procrastinate too long, right? Whereas sometimes my patience holds her back from running too fast into something that she shouldn't run into. So same thing with tenacity and persistence, right? Your brother is someone who is higher on persistence. Probably says, "Well, wait a second. I'm going to slow us down because we need to be persistent in this case." You're like, okay, cool. You let him step up and take forward. So this is where teaming starts to really be advantageous in understanding this about yourself and then understanding about your teammates.
Well, it's great because it shows me, well, for teams in general, but like you as a SEAL, I would assume. So let's say you go on, I'm making this up because of my admitted ignorance here, but you go on a mission and there's 20 guys and they come and they say, okay, guys, you're huddled in a room. Here is the mission. And they're going to say what it is based upon what it needs. I assume then you're going to look around and go, okay, who's our best lead for this?
100%. Okay. Now let's take another one. You're high on introversion, okay, and you're low on collaboration. This makes total sense, okay? So real quick for your audience, though, let's just define introversion, and obviously its opposite, which is extroversion. A lot of people think introversion and extroversion is part of the social intelligence category. A lot of people think that that to be socially adept means you have to be extroverted, right? Introversion and extroversion have nothing to do with your ability to be socially adept, right? It all has to do with where you gain energy from. So here's the example, right? My wife and I, again, opposites. She's extroverted. I'm introverted, right? We go to a cocktail party with 80 people, okay? We walk into that party. We spend 3 hours at the party. Both of us have a great time. We're very socially adept. We're having a great time. Everybody enjoys everybody else's interactions. We leave that party after 3 hours. All I want to do is go to bed. That's all I want to do. I'm done. I'm spent energetically. My wife can't even get to sleep. She's just completely fired up, right? And so this is where introversion and extroversion happen. Now, you are higher on introversion and then at the same time lower on collaboration, okay? What that means is when you're around people, it exhausts you a lot of times, right? And so you tend not to try to be in big collaborative groups because it's just exhausting for you. It's difficult. Again, there's no right or wrong there. It's just how you show up. And so you in the biking, you said, I'd rather just be on my own bike, right? I don't want to have to deal with that, right? Probably in your business life, you stick to smaller groups versus bigger groups, right? Because that's what you're more energetically. So the introvert can gain energy from very small groups, like onesie, twosie, three kind of people groups. It's the larger groups that really start to spend the introvert's energy, right? You can have highly introverted people who just want to be by themselves, which again, extremes in both ways are bad. But the fact that you're high on introversion and lower on collaboration makes total sense.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the energy. Thank
Yeah.
you. Because my wife and I, Rich, just so you know, dead up the same as you
Yeah,
guys. So we go out, I can charm and I can connect and I can care and whatever. But afterwards, yeah, I'm done and I'm ready to be totally by myself. And she is just, it's like you just plugged her into a
That's
wall
right.
charger.
That's right.
And she is totally lit up. But then on the collaboration, it's been interesting. This is something that I have struggled with.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we hold collaboration up and realize, okay, so there's somebody that I had on a show a long time ago, and I wish I could remember her name, but she was a founder of a company, and she talked about that. She said, I collaborate by let's split up the jobs needed for this endeavor, this initiative, but my job I want to do alone. Yeah. I don't want somebody right there doing it side by side. Somebody else may, but I want the autonomy to do mine alone. And that would be mine. So I may collaborate in the effort, but my role, I really want to do that by myself. Yes. That's where I am most at peace. I like to create. Yes. And to do that. So understanding that helps me know where I'm going to flourish, where I'm not.
And what's interesting, so I find, and I think you'd agree with this, as a fellow creator, you would agree with the fact that a lot of times it's very beneficial to get multiple minds on an idea. And so if you lend yourself, you trend towards someone who's not as collaborative, you have to make an effort to sometimes get some of those things in front of other people. I do creatively, I do really well. I can put something together. I do really well when I'm in a group and we start to iterate on stuff, right? That's when my creative stuff really starts to soar, right? You might be someone who's like, you're really good at the creative by yourself, but just you might have to push yourself or ease yourself into, hey, let me make sure that I'm doing a little bit of collaboration on this, so I'm getting some other perspective, because that's important, right? It's just something you have to think about more often, right?
Well, we were talking about books. You know, we both have the same literary agency, and this came to pass through that process, because I just went out. You know, we sold the book and did my brain dump. You know, here's the manuscript, and they pretty much said, "Man, the concept's there, but this isn't going to fly."
We got to.
And there's where it started. Right. And, you know, to the point of, we've got the big ticket, you know, publisher and the editor, and they actually got me to hire a book doctor and pay to help get this thing into a structure that actually works, instead of it just being Kevin's brain dump. That was a difficult collaboration, but it was just required, or I would have never finished it.
100%. And they did the same thing with me. I was like, listen, I know how to write. I like writing. I'll just write it myself. Like, well, we really think you should work with someone who knows how to write books and they can help you organize and put it together. I was like, okay. It was the best experience of my life, because I am a collaborator, right? So to be able to write a chapter and then work with my buddy Sean, and he's like, okay, cool, this is great. Let's do this, let's do that. And it's like, oh man, that made it even better, right? So again, it's just really understanding where we fall in this.
Well, and it's good to hear your perspective, because I would not say I didn't love that.
Yeah.
Now, I was highly grateful for it, but it did not give me energy to work with the editor and for her to go, dude, this doesn't fit here. This needs to go over there. And I'm trying to wrap my brain around it, because I just want to go on and do the next thing.
That's right.
But oh my gosh, my gratitude was dramatic, because again, it never would have. Well, it just wouldn't have been any good. It would have been a pile, which is what it was.
Now, let me talk about task switching. You're high on task switching, which also speaks to and falls in quite neatly with the fact that you're low on patience and high on tenacity, right? Task switching is this ability to kind of mentally shift between one thing and another. You can go from the email to the phone call to this, and you can do it fairly rapidly. The people who are lower on task switching, what happens with those people, if they're focused in on something, if something takes their attention to something else, it's hard for them to kind of pull out and refocus. It's difficult for them to do that. You tend to do it fairly rapidly, which speaks to your levels of tenacity and patience as well. So the fact that you're high on task switching makes sense. The fact that you're high on perseverance makes sense. Perseverance is really literally this idea. You fall 7 times, get up 8, right? You are someone who, no matter how many times you fall, you're going to keep on getting up. That's just the way it's a testament to what you've done in your life in terms of athletics, but also in entrepreneurship and all that stuff. Where we have to be careful with perseverance is what was your resilience score, by the way? Where'd you fall on resilience?
Apparently not too good. I'm scrolling. It's 5.7. It was down there.
So this is where we have to be very careful. A lot of high performers fall into this trap. They confuse and conflate perseverance with resilience. Okay, perseverance is I get knocked down, I'm going to keep on getting up. Resilience is I get knocked down and I'm able to recover back to baseline. Resilience is a recovery, not a keep on getting up, right? So I want people to think of resilience as this rubber band that you stretch, and then when you let go, it goes back to its original shape. I get knocked down, I can come back to baseline. I get knocked up, I get a huge success, I can still come back to baseline. I can rebound and recover. Resilience has to do with recovery. Where people get in trouble a lot of times in the high performing arenas is that they are high on perseverance and they're low on resilience, which means you're just going to keep on doing it. You're going to go, and you're never going to take time to actually recover. You will slowly and eventually burn out, right? So one of the things you have to be careful with is your perseverance is really high, which means I can throw anything at you, Kevin, and you're just going to keep on getting hit and getting up and getting hit and getting up and getting hit and getting up. It's going to be awesome, right? But if you don't deliberately say, hey, I'm going to stop for a second, I'm going to take time to recover and get back to baseline, re-energize, refocus. I'm going to stop doing this thing. I'm going to stop getting the next dopamine hit or dopamine challenge. Then you're going to fall yourself. You're going to find yourself in burnout. So if you're high on perseverance and low on resilience, you have to make a more deliberate effort to stop, effectively and deliberately recover before you go do the next thing.
Okay, I got a great story for you. Yeah. Ready? Last year, Rich, September, I went on with a group of guys. I can't remember how many there were, 40 of us, I think. It's called the Suffer Fest. Okay. And we went to the Grand Tetons in Wyoming, and it was 40 miles, 10 or 11,000 feet of elevation. And you do it in a day nonstop. So it took a lot of us around 13 hours. Yeah. So we did that. That's a lot. It's a big day. Just no problem at all. No, for me, perseverance and doing it, and I'm, fit and in shape, just no problem at all. I even got some leg pain at the end. The last 3 miles, I was hobbling a little bit. My mechanics gave out a little, but still wasn't a big deal. We did that. It's fine. About a week later, I go to a mountain bike trip with 12 guys, and we're in Taos, New Mexico. So I was a pro cyclist. I've been mountain biking all my life. I'm an elite level at this. I had the biggest wreck of my entire life. Okay, so this is last September. I broke 7 bones and partially collapsed a lung in this massive. I went. It was just the worst case in every way. Landed with a plunk. It was all blunt trauma. I couldn't. My resilience was so low. With me not being able to be at my best. So I'm at my best. I'm fit. I'm able. I can persevere. Now I got broken and I couldn't put my pants on. I had to have, everybody, couldn't put my pants on. I couldn't go to the bathroom by myself for a while. I couldn't move. And it wasn't a giving up, but I was not resilient. Yeah. I did not know that. And it was kind of like, if I can't be able, then I don't know what to do with myself and I don't want to do anything. So my recovery, so when I got to where I could walk, I could do some stuff, I didn't.
Yeah, that's right.
I just kind of sat like a bump and took longer. And I'm 6 months out now and I'm back a ways, but I was surprised. I think that's my point. Maybe it's not. So looking at my attributes, maybe it's not to you because I was surprised to go, man, when I got broken though, it kind of took the wind out of my sails.
Yeah. Well, you realize, and so it's a trap a lot of high performers fall into because we get fixated on the next dopamine reward, and it's like, oh, I did that. What's the next thing? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? And this is kind of the drive. It's to do more, and a lot of us have to really look at resilience as a deliberate choice. Listen, I had it today. Like I'm 50 now, right? And I work out every day. I try to, get in the gym and I lift weights. And today I'm lifting and I'm doing my routine. And at one point in my routine, I feel something in my back. I'm like, okay, that's right on the edge of something going wrong, right? Now, normally my normal me is like, I got to power through. I got to finish this workout, right? But cognizant me and deliberate me and says, okay, you know what? I can put this, I can stop my workout. I don't need to do this. I don't need to finish this. Let me stop. Let me stretch a little bit and I'll just hit it again tomorrow. Right. Or I'll do something different. Yeah. This is what it means to be deliberate about our resilience, And so it just, we have to, again, especially as people who tend to like to run that top performing lane all the time, we can fall into entropy pretty fast, and it's not a good scene. And what happens, like your bike example is a perfect one, because this can happen in business. It can happen in any other facet of life. Something hits you and it takes you out way worse than you could have ever imagined, because you've hit that breaking point. And so now you're down for 10 weeks instead of, so today, had I pushed on, I might have been down for 4 weeks while my back healed up, versus I'll be at it again next week, right? That's no big deal. So that's
I'm with you, man. I'm 53, and I can still put a big performance out. My recovery takes 100%. Longer, and I've learned to pay attention to the twings, just like what you're talking about, and not push those. All right. I mean, we've been going through these. I mean, you have these. What's the number of the attributes? 25?
Well, 25 in the book. And then there's 42 though, that we now work with, and the assessment, goes through 42. So in the book, it's 5 categories of 25. And then now the assessment tool, there's 9 categories and 42 total. Yeah.
Okay. So the assessment I took, was the 9 categories, but going through these, you've got them separated. Well, maybe we should go that. I mean, cause I've just got the 5 categories here, grit, mental acuity, drive, leadership, and team ability. Now that's in the book, but then when I went over and did the assessment, it was in the 9 categories. So point being, you've got these attributes grouped in certain areas. I mean, there's some of them I want to go through. Is it fair to go through?
Please do. Whatever you want to talk about.
Well, this first one, grit. So folks, as you're going through that, I mean, you take us through, I love the stories that you give to them, but you go through, like, under grit is courage, perseverance, adaptability, and resilience. And the way that you define those, again, let's just hit on some of the highlights for me. I mean, for one, courage. I love that. It's not you start off with, it's not the lack of fear.
Oh yeah, not at all. Yeah, courage is interesting, and it's actually there's a deliberacy in it being the very first attribute, because people have asked me, hey, are there any of the attributes that are the most important? To which I usually say, I try not to judge them that way. However, I could make a pretty reasonable argument that if you're low on courage, life is probably going to be hard for you, right? What we have to understand about courage is the ability to step into one's fear, right? When we start to feel fear, we get faced with 2 neurological choices, and we all know those choices. One is fight and one is flight, right? Those are in fact 2 separate switches in your brain, right? In other words, if you choose to fight, it's a switch that gets clicked in your brain. If you choose to flee, it's another switch. When you choose to fight, i.e. step into your fear, a switch gets clicked and you actually get a dopamine reward for that, right? You get rewarded for stepping into our fear. That's why when we do things like that, it feels good to step into our fear oftentimes. It's also what's caused our species to go from cave dweller to space explorer, because nature has designed a reward system to step into discomfort. All this to say is that there cannot be courage in the absence of fear. You don't have access to that courage switch unless fear is present. So what does that mean? It means that your level of courage has nothing to do with how often you're afraid. Okay. Well, I should say it has everything to do with how often you're afraid. So what does that mean? It means just because you have a Navy SEAL doesn't mean the Navy SEAL is automatically more courageous than someone else. Because fear, like, you could be a Navy SEAL in a gunfight with Al Qaeda in the middle of Afghanistan and literally be feeling less fear than the 8-year-old you just asked to step in front of a classroom and introduce themselves, right? The idea is you could be a generally anxious person, and you could be very high on courage because you're constantly stepping into your fear. You're constantly doing it, right? Whereas I'm sure you've seen the documentary Free Solo about Alex Honnold, right? I mean, this is a guy. I mean, he climbs up El Cap with no ropes, right? I mean, I watch the thing and I get sweaty because oh my god, I can't even imagine it.
I did not watch the whole thing. It kind of wrecks me.
Well, I tell you, at one point in that documentary, they look at it, they scan his brain, and they recognize that his fear switch, his courage, his autonomic response doesn't respond the same way normal people do, right? In other words, it takes a while for him to actually feel fear, which means he's not accessing the courage switch as often as someone else maybe. Now, I would never say Alex Honnold is not courageous. He certainly is. But he's not accessing it as often as someone who's generally anxious, right?
Well, can I ask about that, Rich? I mean, couldn't you theoretically? Well, not theoretically. I bet you experienced it. I've got to think you got somebody that came along for SEAL training, and you're realizing okay, I'm going to exaggerate the point. Like, this dude's a psychopath. He has no fear. That's not going to work.
Well, and it's funny because in the book, I call the courage chapter it's titled "Beware the Fearless Leader," because it was a piece of advice that one of my CEOs gave me, or one of the senior officers gave me early on in my career. He said, "Hey, beware the fearless leader, because that person's going to get you killed." Right? Fear is designed by nature as a risk assessment tool. Right? It's designed by nature to tell us as human beings, "Hey, pay attention because there's risk here," right? We do not want to ignore it. We do not want to feel it. We need to feel it. We need to embrace it because it's telling us, hey, pay attention. It's actually heightening our senses, right? We're getting actually autonomically aroused. We're getting focused. It's doing a lot of stuff neurobiologically. So fear is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. If I ever saw people who were, quote, fearless, I hate the word fearless. If I saw the people who were fearless, I run the opposite direction, because that person's going to get you killed.
Well, and to some degree, as I was reading the chapter 2, it got me to thinking about, within courage, you're talking about, okay, you're human. You should have some fear, but you're going to go do it anyways. And there's an aspect of, not from a spiritual standpoint, but I wrote down faith. I mean, some faith that we can make it through, that things are going to be all right, that things will work it out, that we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I agree. And I think faith, I've thought a lot about faith in performance. And this may be right or wrong, but I'll just give you my thoughts on it. I've thought about the difference between faith and confidence, right? And the way I kind of, I guess, pencil sketch the difference between the two is that faith is in many ways belief without evidence, and confidence is belief with evidence, right? So in other words, if I'm confident about something, I have evidence to feel confident that I'm going to make it through. Faith is, I don't have a lot of evidence, but I have faith I'm going to make it through. And I think both actually serve important elements in our endeavors, because there are going to be things that we're embarking upon in any pathway that we have not done before. There's no evidence as to whether or not we can do this, right? But our faith helps us get through it. There'd be other things. It's like, listen, I've jumped out of a plane before. I'm confident that I can do it again, right? There's other things that we're going to embark that I've done before. And so I can lean on confidence in that case. But I think both faith and confidence play a major role as you're doing anything that involves challenge, stress, uncertainty, and or fear.
It's a great depiction of it. It got me thinking about it in a different way. Well, again, under grit, and these are under grit, which you said that in and of itself, grit is not an attribute, but it covers this
combination. It's a combination of these attributes.
Okay. Yeah. And so under there, you got courage, perseverance, not quitting. We kind of, I think we've covered that somewhat. The next one we've got is adaptability, which is, it's one, again, well, I appreciate you saying it's not a right or wrong.
Right.
You may be, there are certain, maybe you can come up with them, but I mean, there are some certain areas, roles, jobs where you don't need adaptability. We need somebody who can do a similar thing day in and day out and stick with it. I have a son who's like that. And I see people in roles like that, and thank goodness that's what the role requires. It is, you don't need a whole lot of adaptability. Right. I need adaptability to be in things where I have to. Otherwise, it's not going to be sustainable for me. So again, not a right or wrong, but you're going to show us, okay, where is your level of adaptability? And again, going back to that, then if it's low, these probably aren't going to be a good fit for you. These jobs, roles, activities. If it's high, then you're going to probably be here. I would say, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, if you are literally going to start, run a business, probably going to need a decent level of adaptability.
100%. And adaptability, one way to think about adaptability is it's much more of a reactive attribute. In other words, adaptability is about the environment changing around you, outside of your control, and as to whether or not you can actually flow and adapt. Whereas, for example, task switching is a more proactive form of that. That's, I'm deliberately shifting focus points, or I'm deliberately changing focus points, right? So again, people are going to fall in different areas. And again, I would say every human being is adaptable. It's just your level of comfort when it happens. That's outside of your control. There are some people who, when that stuff happens, you hate every minute. You're like, oh my God, I can't. It just irks you, right? I'm kind of in the, like I said, I'm kind of in the middle. I said 8, but if the high is 7, I'd say I'm probably a level 5 or so, because for the most part, I'm okay when things are not going as planned, right? But there's part of me, I just don't like it. I like having a plan, and I like sticking to the plan. When things happen, okay, I'll adjust. I'm not too happy about it, right? There are other people who actually thrive in it. They love when things go. I mean, I have a buddy who he's someone who, and he's admitted this, he's single, so he can get away with this. But he said he'll just one day just go to the airport, walk up to the ticket counter and say, where's the next flight going? There. He's like, I'll buy a ticket. And he'll just go to a city randomly and just see what happens, right? That is like high adaptability. Like that's someone who thrives in not having a plan, right? And that's okay. You know, you just have to see where you stand. I could never do that. So
well, and I like that you have it again under the same umbrella, in this case, grit, because as I look at that, adaptability takes a level of courage or faith that things will be okay. And the fourth one you have here then is resilience, which you've got me thinking about it a different way or question. I mean, you got me questioning my perspective on it. So my muse has always been for resilience is the book by Robert Sapolsky, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Which, folks, if you don't know that, it's, zebras going along, eating their grass, having a grand old time on the savannah. Here comes a lion. They jump up, run for their lives. They might die. They get away. Minute later, they're back eating grass. They're not going out that night going, oh my gosh, guys, you can't believe what happened. I got PTSD, not to minimize that, but they're able to be resilient and get back to normal. I would say that I have been that, but I'm questioning it now. Go back to my story that if you knock me down, but I'm still whole, I'm going to get up time and time again. Now you break me. I got broken. It shattered a little bit of my resilience perspective.
I think as humans, our frontal lobe gets in the way of our resilience a lot of times, right? And it's just this idea that we have so much processing power to kind of analyze and think about and worry about things that either are in the future or in the past, that sometimes we just feel like, oh, I don't have time to recover. I don't have time to think about this. I'm judging what recovery even feels and things. I mean, there was a stigma around recovery for years in terms of just like, you don't just keep pushing. I'll sleep when I'm dead type stuff. And and luckily that has started to go extinct a little bit because it's insane, right? But I think we have this unique ability as humans to get in the way of the necessity of this type of stuff, right? But it matters, and recovery doesn't only mean physical; it means mental as well, and it's sometimes especially mental and emotional is the most important because that can be the most insidious.
Goodness, oh well, and I've learned that recently and continuing to learn. The next one here, the category mental acuity, which I appreciate you saying. I kind of paraphrase this, Rich. Mental acuity. You're not talking necessarily about IQ. You're not talking about even being, and there's a lot of definitions around being smart, but as you define it, I looked more at mental acuity being agility. Is that relevant?
It's the way our brain processes the world, right, around us. That's what mental acuity is, and so we all have different levels of each of those attributes. Situational awareness is the first one I talk about. And that's just our level of vigilance, right? People who notice a lot of things about our environment. Navy SEALs are typically high on situational awareness. I go through I'll be walking in New York City and I notice everything. I notice dark alleys. I notice people's hands. I notice cars. I notice all that stuff. My wife, who's walking next to me, she doesn't notice as much. Okay. Again, there's no judgment there. And this is an example of how, in extreme cases, it can be bad, right? Extreme vigilance or extreme situational awareness is hypervigilance. You come back from a war zone. A lot of soldiers have PTSD because we're too hypervigilant. You have to be so in tune with threats, right, that you come back, you can't turn that off, right? And so I remember literally being in the city after coming back from the war zone a couple of times and like saying to myself very deliberately, okay, I don't have to worry about the person who's walking 3 feet behind me. Don't worry about it, right? Put it away, right? So again, where you fall is where you fall, right? So that's situational awareness.
Well, I wanted to pull that out because my first thought was the first Jason Bourne movie. Yeah. He doesn't know who he is, but he sits down in the coffee shop with the girl or whatever. He's like, I have no idea why. I know how many men there are, and what cars parked out there. Whatever he says, I don't know why. Situational awareness. Now, I put a high value on situational awareness, yet, and I was trying just to play with the analogy. If I have a brain surgeon working on my brain, I'd rather he wasn't really concerned about the situational awareness. If they start bombing outside, I hope he can just not be aware and just focus on my brain.
Which is, by the way, that's compartmentalization, right? So compartmentalization, which is the next one, is the ability to focus in on what you're doing and block out everything else around you, right? And so now you talked about having practiced this as a kid, right? You had insane chores, and you realized, okay, well, I just have to get through this. I'm just going to focus on one step at a time and just get through it, right? This is compartmentalization. If people ask me what the single most important attribute to make it through SEAL training is, it's compartmentalization. It's the ability to not worry about things that I don't have to worry about, focus only on something in the moment, focus on that, achieve that, and then pick something else to focus on. And the example would be like, in some of your audience may or may not know, the crucible during Navy SEAL training is called Hell Week, and it's the 5th week of training. And Hell Week is basically you start on a Sunday afternoon and you go until the following Friday afternoon. And during that whole week, you sleep for maybe 2 hours for the entire week, right? And you're constantly running around with hope boats in your area. You're constantly wet and sandy. You're just, you get most people quitting during Hell Week, okay? The saying, which is a truism in Navy SEAL training, is if you think about Friday on Monday, you will quit, right? Mm-hmm. You can't do that, right? You have to think in terms of like small increments, right? So you compartmentalize that entire week to whatever degree you need to. And it's kind of actually, I'm writing about this process in my next book, which I'm working on, which is Mastering Uncertainty. And part of mastering uncertainty requires this ability to compartmentalize and neurologically basically pick these horizons that you can move to without taking into account the big pictures. It's basically the neurological explanation of eating the elephant one bite at a time. Right? So compartmentalization is enormously important. Now, someone who's very, very good at compartmentalization, right, but low on task switching has an issue, because what happens to that person is that person gets focused in on something and can be focused in for 8 to 10 to 12 hours, and their whole world around them can be burning down, right? Because they can't, they don't have enough situational awareness, and B, they're not able to come out of their task and switch to the next focus point. Because what the balance looks like is I can compartmentalize, and this is where SEALs fall in. I can compartmentalize, but I keep an awareness of the situation, or awareness of the environment. So if priorities shift, I can pull out and focus on the next part. I can task switch to the next priority.
Go ahead and mention real quick, because you make the differentiation on task switching separate, or not separate from, but the myth
multitask. Yeah. So people who are really good at task switching get mistaken for multitaskers. But multitasking, as we know, is a myth. Neuroscientists have proven that. Our frontal lobe, our conscious mind, can't focus on more than one thing at a time. Okay. Now, people debate me on this sometimes. And they say, well, Rich, I can listen to my podcast and drive my car. Some people who are listening to this right now might be listening to the podcast and driving their car. It doesn't count if you've relegated that other thing to your unconscious mind. The reason why you can listen to your podcast and drive your car is because you don't have to think about driving your car. Now, if you're driving your car and listening to your podcast, though, and someone swerves in front of you and you have to take evasive maneuvers to avoid that person, right? You will have to rewind the last 15 seconds of that podcast because your brain will have hopped, right? So that's task switching. Our brain is always hopping. Now, the people who are really good at task switching, they can hop from one thing to another thing, and very smoothly and efficiently, right? If you're lower on task switching, it often takes a while. I mean, you can pull out, but that's the person who gets, if they're in something, they get distracted, and it's really hard for them to kind of get into the new thing or get back into what they were doing. It's difficult for them to make that switch, right? Again, where we fall is where we fall, and we have to figure out that out, and we can start to identify our behaviors and why we behave the way we do a lot more effectively.
Well, and to be fair to the yin and the yang of that, that was one of my high ones. So I'm really high on task switching. I'm really low on focus. Yeah. So when you want me to sit there and focus on a task and finish writing the book or whatever it is, I'm looking for the next distraction.
Which speaks, by the way, to your low discernment, because if you're low on focus, it's also hard to be discerning. So, yeah. Okay,
fair. This one is an interesting one. Your next one under mental acuity is learnability. And I appreciate, again, your grace with, it's not right or wrong, but the learnability, which is applying info. That's one that I'm sensitive to, not, I mean, with myself and with other people. I mean, you know, this is a podcast. I mean, we can listen to a podcast. We can read your book. We can do whatever. We can do that. And that's gaining knowledge. It does not mean we are learning. And I get frustrated just as much with myself as somebody else who I can take a message and I can hear it and it can resonate. I understand I got new knowledge, and then I can go forth and not apply any of it at all. And for mental acuity, you're listening to that learnability, the ability. Is that fair to say then? Are you able to take stuff and take action?
It is. It's less to do with the ability to learn and more to do with the speed and efficiency with which we learn. All human beings have the ability to learn, right? The speed and efficiency with which we learn. And by learning, it means you're taking that information, metabolizing it, and then able to integrate it into your operating system, right? That's learnability. Okay. Some people are really rapid at this, especially depending on context. But there are some people, the people who are really high on learnability, the people you show or tell how to do something one time and they have it. They don't make mistakes twice, right? They just got it, right? Other people are a little bit lower. You tell them to do something one time or they show them and they make a couple mistakes, right? Or we're medium the road and it depends, right? In SEAL training, and certainly in the specialized training I was going through kind of midway through my career, I recognized that I was lower on learnability than some of my teammates because we'd finish a day of training and they'd go all drinking. We'd clean our gear. They'd all go out drinking. I'd have to stay back and look at my stuff because if I didn't look at my stuff and kind of refocus and kind of just remind myself, I wouldn't absorb it properly for the next day, right? So I recognized I was lower on learnability than they were in that environment. So it's really about where we fall on this, where people get in trouble, especially when we do work with organizations because we start to help them figure out what attributes are important. They think of learnability as the ability to learn. It's not really that. It's the speed and efficiency. And there are some jobs that require a high speed and efficiency for learning, but actually not many of them. Okay, there's only a few out there. There's less jobs that require that high learnability than jobs that, hey, as long as you put the effort in and make the effort, you will learn it. You'll pick it up. But there are certain jobs that require some real speed and efficiency in the way they learn and pick things up. And you have to be careful in terms of understanding which jobs those are.
Well, it's interesting. You got me thinking about it, Rich, because so I scored a 6.5. It was, fairly decent there, but I would say that's because of my desire to learn. Because as you're talking about you coming back and the guys going drinking and you staying, I feel like I have to make an effort. I mean, I've got to take the book. I mean, I've got your book behind me, but I'm taking it. I use these wooden bookmarkers so I can use them to underline. Because if I just do it by hand, I scribble all over the place. So, I use them but I underline and I take notes, and I really have to make the effort to just hearing the knowledge. I'm lost. Yeah. I would be like you. I've got all this new stuff. Oh my gosh, I've got to figure it out. So it's an effort, but I think that's relevant too. So you may not be a natural learner. You may have to be more. So I'm going to be one that has to maybe like you. Then I have to put more.
It depends on where we fall, and a lot of these attributes. The fun thing about them is they're never real black and white. There's still a lot of gray in there, and context does matter. Yeah. There might be contexts inside of which we're a little bit higher on learnability, and other contexts where we're a little bit lower. I mean, so and honestly, even neurology comes into play. The more intense an environment, the faster we're going to actually create those neural networks. So we actually learn faster with more intensity sometimes. So yeah, but overall, we have to figure out where we are, and if we know we're a little bit lower, then we can deliberately put in a little bit more effort.
Your next category is drive. I mean, that's my playground there, or my interest, I should say, because it's not like I've nailed it all, but I appreciate that. I mean, you start off there saying, if you're hungry and thirsty, you are driven to find food and water. I want to play with that because I look at healthy or authentic drive as knowing what you want and knowing why and being in agreement with that. So if you're personally starving and you're hungry and thirsty, you are driven to go get food and water. You know why. There's no problem. That's pure, raw, unadulterated drive. Now, I was playing with that to think, okay, if you're now sent to, go hunting, get food, let's say for, people yourself or people that are starving, again, you're good. Now, let's say that you are taken in as I'm going to play with the military, taken in as an enemy, as a hostage, a prisoner, and you're sent out to go hunt to feed the enemy army. You're not as driven there. I mean, you may be driven to save your butt, but it's a different, now you're starting to struggle with that. And we could go down the line of reasons why that you may not be in alignment with. So, we're looking at drive as what is, true and clear and authentic to you. Do you know what you're driving to? Do you know what you want? And do you know, and are you in agreement with why? I mean, that's got to have come into play in your, top secret stuff that you did out there with looking and going, man, questioning. Yeah. What are we doing, and do we know why? And am I okay with this?
100%. I mean, and I would say that there is, when it comes to drive, especially elemental stuff like finding food, there's survival. Stress and fear are in fact drivers, right? Stress is designed to get us up and moving to do something, right? When we're hungry, our body gets stressed. It's driving us to go find food. When we're lonely, our body is stressed. It's driving us to go find companionship. So I think the drive that I talk about in terms of these attributes is more along those longer term endeavors that we decide that we want to go do and embark upon. What are the things that drive us to do those longer term things? Different from grit, because grit are really more about those shorter term challenges and endeavors. What are those things that I need to push through? Those little things, right? Those shorter stuff. Whereas drive is like those longer term stuff, and that could be like, again, if we're not talking about survival, for example, that's the the prehistoric man who they have a fine food and shelter, but there's something about that mountain over in the distance that you want to go explore, and you're driven to go out there and build a new shelter. Like that's the kind of drive we're talking about. And so when we break down those attributes, those are the ideas. What are those attributes that allow the human being to pick those longer term endeavors and actually be driven towards them?
Well, and this is one of those things, I'm sure, I hope that you've realized this too. I'm reading your take on drive and I'm thinking, it needs to go in my book. I need to rewrite. Can I do an update on that? I love the, first one there is self-efficacy. And I'm, some of this I took out of the book and I'm paraphrasing my own thoughts. My belief, is there a belief in my own skill and capacity is what I put in there. And I even was thinking, even if my skill, to the story you told earlier about the guy who couldn't swim, even if my skill is lacking, knowing that I will do whatever it takes, to complete this and a confidence that I can.
Yeah. I think that, so self-efficacy combines three things basically. And those three things are initiative to get started, the confidence that I know once I get started, or I should say it starts with confidence, or even you could say faith in terms, I know I can do this, the initiative to get started, and then the optimism or the realistic optimism to know that as I encounter challenges, I'll find my way through, right? So self-efficacy is a combination of all those three things. If you only have one of those three, it could be fair. It could be somewhat inert, right? If all you have is faith or confidence, but you don't have the initiative, you don't have the optimism, you're not going to do anything, right? So if all you have is the initiative and no confidence, no optimism, then it's just going to be frenetic energy, right? And if all you have is optimism by itself, well, that's like planting a garden and saying there will be no weeds, and we know there's going to be weeds, right? So self-efficacy combines those three things. In the sense that someone understands and can effectively look at an objective and say, okay, I know I can do this, whether it's faith or confidence. I'm going to get started. I'm going to take the first steps. And then as I keep going, I have a realistic optimism that I'll figure it out along the way. Right. I think that's what the self-efficacious person combines in terms of that attribute.
Okay, well, then that gets me thinking, too, just on the overall aspect of attributes. Well, gosh, I'll ask you then, if you look at that, my question is, do you look at them as primary, I don't know if that's the way to say it, as fixed or fluid? Because if I look at my self-efficacy, I would say, well, it's pretty, I want to say, and I think I would say, it's pretty high. Well, it depends where you put me. I spend most of my time participating in things where I do have confidence and I do have experience. Put me out in the woods, put me on a bike, put me in some aspects of the water, not all of them, not like you, but to some degree do that. Put me on a show talking about a topic in an arena that I am familiar and experienced with. Now, if you all of a sudden say, hey, Kevin, let's talk about finances and investing. Yeah. Well, my self-efficacy just dove. Is that relevant?
It is relevant. Although I would say that this is where self-awareness comes in. I mean, again, we're all specific automobiles, right? And if we understand, if I understand I'm a Jeep, then when someone asks me to pontificate about Ferrari tracks and Ferraris, I will know that, well, that's not really my lane, and I'm not going to be able to do as well in that lane as I possibly can. So I think, again, this is the gray area of these attributes, which there always is. So I definitely think self-efficacy applies to those domains inside of which we tend to feel more comfortable and tend to find our niches in. But I would say I would still make at least an argument that the highly self-efficacious person is in many cases going to try to make an attempt or figure it out, or just be so self-aware that's like, you know what, that's not a lane that I'm even.
I was going to say, maybe I'm if you're confident in that, I would be confident to say, you know what, I'm confident that I'm not going to have a whole lot of value. Let me go get Barbara.
Yeah. And then maybe that's the so self-efficacy includes and involves that confidence factor. And if the confidence is not there, then the self-efficacy is not there either.
Okay, that's fair. The next one you have here is discipline, and man, again, I'm surprised at some of the paradigm shifts, or I guess just again new knowledge, dissecting these things. Because as discipline, we all would tend to, I think all of us, everybody here, think of your definition of discipline, and we're going to paint a picture right away. We all think, and you separate it from staying focused, persevering. But you make a segment between discipline and self-discipline that was really interesting. Tell us.
So discipline holistically as an attribute. When someone takes the assessment, and I've tried to as I talk about the attribute more, and as we've built these assessments to help stay a little bit more focused on discipline overall. It's the ability to remain focused and steadfast to achieve a result or outcome. That's what it is in general terms. All right. So, and that's real and it's poignant. Now, the reason why I bifurcate it in the book is because it helps with one's self-awareness, because when you start to bifurcate it, you realize that there's two types of discipline, right? There's what we call inner discipline or self-discipline, and an outer discipline. Okay. Outer discipline, or let me start with inner discipline. Inner discipline, self-discipline has to do with those goals or outcomes that you embark upon, that the outside world has no say in whether or not you accomplish. Okay. So that'd be like you and I making we say to ourselves, okay, I'm going to work out and eat healthier. Okay. All right. We can make that decision. Okay. And then we can be in Vegas next week and we can be at the buffet. The buffet is not going to throw pastries at us, right? It's all on us as to whether or not we do that, right? The outside world has no say in whether or not we accomplish that. Okay. Outer discipline has to do with those goals, objectives, endeavors that we decide upon that the outside world has a say in whether or not you accomplish. That is writing a best-selling book. It's becoming a successful podcaster, becoming a Navy SEAL, right? As you embark upon that objective, the outside world is going to throw things at you that you have to navigate around. It has a say in whether or not you accomplish. So the reason why these are interesting, because you can actually be high on one and low on another. I've experienced and known many people who are extremely high on self-discipline and really low on outer discipline. And what that looks like is someone who is like in super good shape. They eat the same. They eat the same time every day. They work out the same time every day. Everything about their day and their lives is completely structured. They can't get a long-term objective goal to accomplish to save their lives. And the reason why that is, when you're at the extremes, is because the highly self-disciplined person who has low outer discipline is usually bound and comfortable in structure and routine. It's like, do this, do this, do this. Well, we all know when you decide to do something on the, like write a book or do a podcast, the outside world is going to interrupt your routine almost every day, right? You may not be able to get the meal that you thought you were. You might have to skip your workout one day, whatever that is. And the really highly self-disciplined person doesn't like that shift at all, right? They're like, "Ooh, I don't like that. I got to go back to my discipline, my structured nature," right? So they sometimes they struggle with those long-term outer discipline goals and objectives. Now you can have the outer discipline, high on outer discipline, low on inner discipline.
Can I pick on what you just said? Because I was thinking about it a minute ago when you were talking about, you go out, you go with the guys, you train all day, you kill it. So all the external stuff, you're disciplined, you're carrying logs, you're doing whatever, never quit, whatever. Then you come back to the barracks or whatever, and then they go out drinking. this had to happen with you, some guys who were just, I mean, they were killer overall, but they ultimately couldn't maintain enough self-discipline that they showed up the next morning, or they didn't show up, or they were hungover, or they were so incapacitated from the lack of self-discipline out partying that night that overall,
I mean, you don't find many of those guys who show up in SEAL training, but yes,
well, maybe those are the guys.
Yeah, no, you're right. But so you need to have a semblance of both, right? To succeed. I mean, those who are really successful have a balance, and actually, most people have somewhat of a balance. The reason why I bifurcate them in the book is because there are cases of people who aren't balanced, and you want to know that about yourself. And if you want to know about others, you might be able to see someone, I see why that person is the way they are, because they're not balanced in that, right? Because you can be high on outer discipline and lower on self-discipline, right? Now, again, like you said, the example you just gave, if you're way too low on self-discipline, you're not going to, you need some sort of self-discipline to accomplish any long-term objective, no matter what it is. But I would say I'm someone who's lower on self-discipline and much higher on outer discipline, right? And that means that I'm really good at setting and achieving really audacious goals that are like outside the outside world has a say, because I'm actually really good at adapting and flowing and being fluid. I don't need structure. I don't need it, right? But I hate being told what to do, right? I don't even like telling myself what to do. So structure is an issue for me. When I want to be self-disciplined, I have to implement structure into my life, because that's the only way I can maintain or force myself to up my self-discipline, right? So this is an idea of understanding oneself in terms of where you trend, so you can start to accomplish those goals you want to achieve. If you want to write the best-selling book, cool, right? I'm good at that, but getting in shape and losing weight is a real struggle, because I don't have that self-discipline, right? So now I know what I need to work on, okay? So just understand, or vice versa. I'm really good at getting in shape and losing weight, right? But I can't get that long-term project done because
it's so interesting, Rich. You got me thinking about it again, a new way. And even the things of like, what's easier, the discipline to exercise, workout, whatever, for me, pretty easy. I mean, it just doesn't take much. I'm happy to do that. The discipline to watch what I eat and how much I drink in the evening, that's a harder one.
Yeah. And part of it has to do with habits, right? And those habits we create, you've made a habit of working out and staying in shape. So that's something that comes easier to you. I have too. I actually enjoy it, right? Not having beer at the end of the day. It's something I have to work on. Right? Now, again, that's habit. Again, part of that's habit. When you're in the SEAL teams, drinking is a part of the culture, right? So it's just something. So habits do run into this too.
So is being a mountain adventure athlete in Colorado. That's what you do. You go out, you kill it, you come back, you eat a lot of animal, and you drink a lot of alcohol.
The bad news is you get away with that physically as a younger person. You stop getting away with it as you get older, right? So.
That's fair. Well, and I just went through here. I keep looking down as we come to these and looking and going, gosh, I wonder where mine was. Discipline, I think if I counted right, it's the 19th one. I'm at 5.8. And I would have thought prior to that, mine will probably be top 5. Well,
you're middle of the road. You're middle of the road, which means which speaks to your success. You can balance both of them, but you now understand where you trend on either side and where you need to put a little bit more effort. And that's my whole point in this, my whole, I guess, endeavor in this is to help people make those distinctions so that they understand where they can put effort, right? Because by naming it and articulating it, you begin to say, oh, wait a second. Now I know precisely where I can put effort to improve. And that's important.
I'm writing that down. That's what I am. Well, that's what I'm getting here right now. That's the talk is distinctions between these that help me understand them more, help me understand myself more, and I think are opening me up to maybe where some of the struggles are, why I have these struggles and these endeavors, where I don't. And the thing that I want more is helping me as I look at new endeavors and not judge as a bad word, but kind of measure those, project those. Is that going to work out, or am I going to struggle in that area? And that may mean maybe I don't do it, or maybe I'm going to have to get help in this arena because I'm short on, X, Y, Z. I mean, you have open-mindedness as this next one. And I'm thinking, well, the opposite of that would be rigid. Is that fair?
Or closed-minded. I mean, but again, here's another really cool distinction, because the attribute I don't talk about in the book, but is one of the 42 is curiosity, right? People get
Okay.
open-mindedness and curiosity conflated. They think of them as the same things, right? But they're not the same things. Open-mindedness is this ability to be open to new ideas. It's a passive openness to new ideas, perspectives, things like that, right? Curiosity adds a proactive piece, okay, to that whole thing, right? So in other words, you and I could go to Thailand, for example, and we link up with our local friend there, and our friend tells us, hey, I'm going to take you to the most authentic Thai restaurant. And you and I are like, great, let's do it. That's open-mindedness. Or you and I go to Thailand, we link up with our local friend, and we tell that friend, take us to the most authentic Thai restaurant. That's curiosity. Curiosity, there's a proactivity to curiosity that open-mindedness doesn't have right now. The reason why this is important is because they can live independently of each other, right? So in other words, you can be very high on open-mindedness and low on curiosity. What does that look like behaviorally? Well, it looks like someone who's going to be generally agreeable to trying new things, understanding new ideas and perspectives. They're just not going to go seek it out, right? You're not going to find them going seeking things out, but they're going to be open. They're going to be agreeable to that. You can also have someone who's really high on curiosity, but low on open-mindedness. That's dangerous. That's conspiracy theorists, right? Conspiracy theorists are people who are highly curious, but not open-minded. They know exactly what they want to believe, and they will work their damnedest to prove themselves right? People who fall into those categories are dangerous because they're gonna be very myopic in the way they vector their curiosity, right? So, and I've had leaders like this. The leader who shows up is like, I know exactly what I want to do. I know everything, right? This is where we're going, right? There's high curiosity to figure out why one is right, but low open-mindedness. So you have to understand where these start to balance or imbalance. Most of us, fortunately, we're balanced a little bit in most of these, right? But the cool thing is you can start to understand behavior when you start to see these things start to separate and say, oh, wait a second, I see what's going on here. Open-mindedness is in the book of optimal, in the book, because open-mindedness, if you were to default to anyone, it's the safest one to default, right? But curiosity is really important too. You just can't be super curious and closed-minded.
Well, it makes me think about drive and being out of alignment. And man, I'll tell you, Rich, I think I have been, and this won't be a surprise to my audience, but I think I am curious. I'm a curious individual. But a lot of my past, though, was not open-minded, especially coming from, a religious structure. And I wasn't, and that caused friction.
Yeah, we have to be careful because even understanding, and I can count myself as guilty on some of those fronts as well. Certainly, when I look at points of my past and growing up, where whatever it was, a belief system, an ideology, even tribal rules to some extent, created biases that affected my open-mindedness, but didn't necessarily affect my curiosity, and that's where you have to be really careful.
It's so interesting. The next two we've really hit. Cunning is the next one. And again, these are underdrive. Cunning and narcissism. We talked about those at the top of the show, and I appreciate that. Leadership then is the next big category. And you have right off the bat, empathy, which I'll throw this at you, Rich. I have been grappling, curious about empathy recently because I have always put it in a certain category. And I had a couple of different people, therapists on the show, and realizing that contrary to how I thought of myself, well, you saw, we talked about one of my lowest results on your attributes quiz is compassion.
Right. Yeah.
Therefore, I thought I'm not empathetic, only to realize that no, I really feel other people. Almost to a degree that I'll sometimes distance myself. So the empathetic aspect of feeling, and even into situational awareness or social awareness, do I feel everybody? Now, it doesn't mean I want to engage or care or am compassionate, but I feel it.
Yeah. So empathy and compassion. Yeah. So the way I would describe this, and I'll steal this from Brene Brown, is empathy is I feel how you feel. Sympathy is I know how you feel. Okay. And so you can be higher on empathy, and it's not hard for you to get into the feelings of other people, right? And feel that. Compassion is can I sympathize, or do I even want to make the effort to? Now, I'm just going to let me hop off the book here for a second, because both compassion and caring are two attributes that I don't talk about in the book. but are in fact metonyms, right? Because they are two attributes that people think are the same, but they're not. Compassion is this internal expression of knowing how someone feels, whereas caring is a proactive, active thing, right? So what do I mean by that? And the way I'll describe this is by describing the highs and lows. Someone who is high on caring and low on compassion, right? That's like my SEAL corpsman, okay? If I get shot, that guy is going to do everything in his power to take care of me and make sure I survive. His bedside manner might be horrible, okay? Which means he's high on caring, his compassion is low, right? It's just not there. Someone can be very high on compassion but low on caring, which means that person really looks at that homeless person and says, "Oh, I really know. I mean, I can really, feel or know how they feel and feel bad for them, right? But I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm not going to, caring is doing something, caring is that proactive. So where does empathy come into play? Empathy is almost more internal. Empathy is, can you, and how effectively are you able to absorb and feel what other people feel? Again, in general, and this is never a definitive, in general, females are better at this than men. In general, men are a little bit lower on this, right? Animals are empathy machines. We know this. Any of us who are pets, because they don't have they don't have a frontal lobe getting in the way of their limbic. Our limbic brain is all our feelings. That's everything. So our top-down control gets in the way of our empathy a lot of times. But we're wired for empathy. We really are. I mean, anybody who watches, who's ever been in a nursery at a hospital will recognize when one baby starts crying, most of the other babies start crying. Why is that? We're wired for it, right? So where we fall on that matters, though. We have to understand that. But if you're too high on any of this stuff, it can be detrimental.
It's interesting, and I get that again from going through the quiz, some of the segmentations there. Now I remember that, and I would be high on the caring and low on the compassion.
And again, the reason why it's a leadership attribute, at least an elemental leadership attribute in the book, right? I actually pulled it out of the leadership category for the 42, the 9 categories, but in the book, it's an elemental one because when I got out of the Navy and I was in the leadership space and we were doing all this work and we'd be going around the world. And one of the things we do with many of our audiences is we'd have a whiteboard in front of a flip chart and we'd ask a question. We'd say, what do great leaders do? We just ask it and we'd have the crowd just start yelling things at us and we'd start making a list, right? And we'd make a list of like 20 things that people would yell out. It was always the same, right? It was always the same list. And empathy was always in the top 5. Always, right? So intuitively, as human beings, we look for empathy in the people we decide are leaders, right? We really do. When we understand that, we feel like someone's really making an effort to feel how we feel, we're immediately enamored or biased to look at that person as someone we would tend to follow, which is why it's one of the leadership attributes.
Well, it's interesting, and you've got the next one is selflessness, which we talked about. I still struggle with that. How should we look at that and care about that? Because I look at it, and again, I feel like everything we do has some self-interest.
Well, I think we should divorce self-interest from it, right? I think it's more about self-sacrifice, right? What are we sacrificing for another person, right? And this is why we don't look for generous leaders. We look for selfless leaders. Because guess what? Giving someone our time is a selfless act. Time is the currency of leadership because when we give it to someone else, we can't get it back. Everybody has the same amount and we give it away, we can't get it back, right? So you're literally giving someone something you can't get back, right? That people absorb that consciously and unconsciously, right? So as leaders, when we're looking for leadership, we're looking for selflessness, not just generosity, which is why it's important.
Goodness, it's great. Again, you do so many. I could make a list off of this of just how you segment these issues. And it's great because it helps us see it more clearly, I think, and be able to embrace it more and understand ourselves, which is the point. I mean, you've got in here under leadership, authenticity, decisiveness, and accountability. Are there any of those 3 that stick out to you that we often miss, kind of like some of these
those are the 3 base ones that I left in the leadership category when I broke it into 9 categories. Those 3 things, because when I was thinking about what are the most elemental leadership attributes, it's those 3. It's authenticity, accountability, and decisiveness. And the reason is this: first of all, authenticity. Authenticity is this. It's not as much. People think of authenticity as I'm just everything about me is out there, right? That's not authenticity. And as you read in the book, I give an example. One of my COs, he was always grumpy and always asking tough questions, but he was like that with everybody. Authenticity is a consistency in behavior. It's a behavior I can count on every single time because I know that behavior is authentic. And so this CO, like I talk about in the book, turned out to be one of my favorite COs because I could, even though he was always grumpy, always asking tough questions, I could always count on him on being grumpy and asking the tough questions. I knew what to expect. So that's authenticity, right?
Yeah.
So that's an important one. Decisiveness is another important one. What we have to do is we have to just quickly separate making decisions from decisiveness. Making decisions is a skill. You can teach someone how to make better decisions, right? There's guides, there's things you can do, there's ways you can look at information. Decisiveness adds a speed and efficiency to the process, right? Decisiveness is, can someone look at a situation, look at information, and make a decision, right? Now, that is important, but it means nothing in a leadership sense if it's not buttressed by accountability, right? Accountability is an ownership of that which I decide, those decisions I make, consequences, good or bad, right? I own it, right? That's accountability. And it's just so rare that anybody looks at someone who constantly places blame as someone that they'd follow or at least say is a stand-up leader. Anybody who's constantly pointing fingers at other people, it just doesn't endear us to someone who's a leader. So it's that important.
I appreciate what you said on decisiveness. I have to guard myself, Rich, against I'll just make a decision just for the sake of making a decision so we can go forward. That's
your impatience, by the way.
Thank you. My family would agree. And sometimes not making sure that it is a good decision. And it's interesting because what it leads to is then I'm often left with accountability. Am I going to take responsibility for what may or may not have gone right? And I appreciate you saying that because I think, and again, this probably has some of my religious ties to it, that accountability is this kind of, submitting to somebody else's authority and whatnot and being known about that. And yet when I look at real accountability, the best accountability I have is accountability to myself, which, as you said, is personal responsibility.
Well, I would say this almost as a polar opposite to what you said in terms of subjecting yourself to someone else's. Accountability is, in fact, a strategy in the sense that I always felt it was just another way to take control, right? So in other words, there were times as a leader, and of course I was an officer, and I was a commanding officer of one of the SEAL squadrons, right? And there were times as a leader where something would happen or occur, and I would know it was very evident that I had nothing to do with what just happened, but I would deliberately take accountability because what it allowed me to do was take the steering wheel. Okay. If you take accountability, you immediately put yourself in the driver's seat. Okay. If you cede accountability and you place blame, you immediately throw yourself in the back seat and you're at the whim of whoever you just left in the driver's seat. Right. So accountability is not only ownership, it's a strategy for controlling, and taking control of a situation or environment so you can better you can create better results. So that's another way to look at it in terms of the importance of leadership.
Well, I appreciate that. It reminds me of Tom Bilyeu of Impact Theory and him talking about, he's got this old video that's it's called "It's All Your Fault." But he ultimately, and I've used the vernacular ever since talking with him of saying, when we blame, we give our power away. Right. And so even if it's asinine to take blame for something, you're better off to take the blame because then at least he didn't. But I'm going to add that now because it gives you the ability to have the steering wheel and be in control. That's right. That's awesome. The last one here is team ability, my absolute lowest category, which again brings me back to my buddy Joe. And I'm assuming that's why he said, "Man, Ranger School in and of itself, Kevin, you would have dug that." But you wouldn't have made it here at West Point, and in the military, and this probably has a lot to do with it. So with team ability, you've got integrity, humility, and humor. The integrity one, I appreciate your writing on that because you kind of call us to the mat on questioning how we look at that. And you use the story of seeing somebody in the classroom cheating. Yeah. And is it integrity to tell? If you're approached about that, the teacher says, "Hey, were they to tell, or is it not?" So Again, segment that
integrity is really, break it down is do the right thing. Okay. And do the right thing is defined by rules and values to a certain degree. And those rules and values are always subjective. They really are. As much as we like to think that they're not, they are. Do the right thing looks different and means something different for a Cub Scout troop than it does for an ISIS troop. Okay. But I would submit to you that if you had a Cub Scout that stole $5 from his fellow scout, compared it to an ISIS person who ran into a building and blew up themselves because they said they were going to, who's living in more integrity in terms of their group, right? So the reason why integrity sits in the team ability category is it has everything to do with what do the right thing means for a group. And a group can be anything. The group can be a religious group, it can be a SEAL team, it can be a business team, or it can be a family team, right? It's really all about how you look at and how you adhere or relate to or align with the rules and conditions of that group, right? So if we're finding ourselves, quote, low on integrity, it's not necessarily meaning we're a bad person. What it means is that whatever group we're looking at in terms of aligning ourselves with, we're not necessarily in alignment with, right? But more importantly, it means that, that we, especially as leaders of teams, if we're not really very clear and specific about what do the right thing looks like, just stand by, because the group's going to figure it out on their own, and you might not like what it looks like. You have to be very explicit about what do the right thing looks like. So that's really the integrity game, is that it's a subjective thing.
Interesting. Conscientiousness is what you have next. That one is not common in the current cultural vernacular. Conscientiousness. So define that for us.
The ability to be reliable, work hard, and I think be diligent are the three things, right? Diligent, reliable, and work hard, right? It's a combination of those things, right? Can someone rely on me to do what I say I'm going to do? And when I'm there, am I putting forth an effort that's noticeable? And am I diligent about what I'm doing? I'm not just not just everywhere. I'm focused. I'm focused on what I need to get done. Conscientiousness is a combination of all that. And I think you just can't, it's very difficult to be part of a team of other people if you can't be a combination of those three things.
Yeah. It reminds me, just again, can I count? And I know that those were part of the questions in the quiz on, can I be counted on?
Yeah. But again, if you take those in their pieces, right? Like for example, if you're really reliable, okay. In other words, you show up every time you show up, but when you do, you don't work hard and you're not diligent, you're not conscientious, right? If you really work hard and you're diligent, but you're not reliable, you're not conscientious. If you're very diligent, but you don't work hard and you don't show up, you're not, so it's a combination of those things. And again, those things are the reason why it gets a little bit soft or gray there, is because those things are sometimes defined by the group. Every group might have different definitions of what those three things look like. So some groups look at reliability as different than other groups. Here's a great example. People asked me one time what the biggest thing I had to get used to was getting out of the SEAL teams, right? And I told them, I said, it's the way everybody looks at time, okay? And they said, they said, what do you mean by that? I said, well, because in the military, we had three versions of time. There was military time, there was civilian time, and there was Navy SEAL time. Okay. Military time was if you weren't 15 minutes early, you were late. Okay. Civilian time was any time between start time and 15 minutes, you're fine. Navy SEAL time was plus or minus 30 seconds. Okay. Because that's how we actually used to plan our helicopters. Like we used to tell our helicopters, okay, we're going to be here at 1:23 plus or minus 30 seconds, because being too early was as bad as being too late. Right. And so when we talk about reliability as defined by a SEAL team, it looks different than reliability defined by a team that's getting on a Zoom meeting. Right. Because and I have to suspend judgment. Yeah. Right. I can't, if I'm sitting here on a Zoom and someone's 3 minutes late, I can't be, judging them, because for them, there's nothing wrong with 3 minutes late. And I'm sitting here thinking, no, plus or minus 30 seconds, right? So these things can be somewhat subjective to the rules of the team, which is why they fall into this team ability category.
It's so interesting. I had that in kind of a side note about how you must look at time. Again, judging from what I see in the movies, it's not like I've been there, but things are down to the 10th, 10 seconds can be minutes as far as what you plan, what you do, what you achieve. And yet it shows me why you apologize for being a few minutes late getting on the call here today. And I'm thinking, dude, I've never had anybody be early ever. I've done this, whatever, 250 times.
What you didn't see is like I actually hit start like right when the clock hits 1:30, which is where I hit start, and then the camera had issues, and I was like, oh my gosh, and I was frustrated because I was missing my 30-second window, right? But then I have to put that away. But again, the good thing is I live to that standard nowadays because I think it's fun and funny. I don't make anybody else live to that standard, right? And that's the most important thing, However, I will tell you this: it was, I have coffee with a bunch of SEAL, guys I went to war with. They're now retired, so we see each other once in a while. We have coffee. One in particular, I hadn't seen him in a couple of years. I ran into him at a retirement party, and we're like, "Oh my gosh, we got to get together. Let's have coffee." And we looked at our calendars, like, "Wait, we like a month from now." He's like, "We'll meet a month from now. We'll meet at this coffee shop at this time." We didn't talk for a month, okay. And 1 month later, I showed up early because I wanted to, just be there, right? Within 30 seconds, he walks in the door, right? I was like, plus or minus 30 seconds, right? It's just natural for us to kind of think that way. So it does relate. So.
It makes sense. Yeah. And again, I'm looking at my test your conscientiousness. I'm way down there. It's lower. It's 4.9, lower medium. And I remember answering the questions, can you count on me? I think, my family would say, well, of course, for the things that really matter. But if it's something that's kind of mid-level and I look at it as not important, I may not. I gotta fess up.
Well, again, and it speaks a little bit of the collaboration. I mean, if for you, group work is not as if group work is not it doesn't hold as high of a regard for you as it does for say me. For me, because collaboration is so high, I'm always cognizant about how another person is viewing my tardiness or my punctuality, or I don't, for me, it's very important that but I was part of a team for 21 years that was, whether it was a part of me before that, but even if it wasn't, it was highly ingrained. So it is what it is.
No, it makes sense. Humility is the next one. And as interesting as I was reading your depiction of humility, that I'll just throw it at you. For some reason, I wrote down just trust as a piece of that I hadn't really thought of in regards to it.
Yeah, trust is so we talk about trust. So what we actually run a whole course on trust where we dissect trust into elements and we say what are the elements of trust and humility is simply one factor of trust. But humility, what we have to understand is people think of humility as a default to kind of almost showing one's weaknesses, but what true humility is on a team is being vulnerable with one's strengths and weaknesses, right? I'm going to show you everything. The highest performing teams, right? On a SEAL team, for example, I wear my weaknesses and my strengths all on my sleeve, right? Because what that signals to my teammate is, hey, Rich is going to be helping you. He's going to be strong. You lean on him for this stuff. But when it comes to this stuff, he's going to be leaning on you, right? Everything has to be on the table. That's true humility. It's not just showing your weaknesses. It's actually showing your strengths and your weaknesses. And part of that humility is to endeavor to understand that about oneself, which is also understanding your attributes.
Man, that's not, that's not what we think of with the military. We think, no, it's all about strength and even playing over your cards there. And even in the culture today, I think that's consistent with a lot of people, men especially. We don't go and talk about our weaknesses. We want to come off as strong as we possibly can.
I will concede that in the SEAL teams, the emotional weaknesses are not generally talked about. However, in the environment such as the SEAL teams, right? I always kind of say it's somewhat natural to be humble because what you realize, again, day one of SEAL training is that, they take you down to nothing, right? But you're always going to be in an environment that will humble you if you turn your back on it, right? I always kind of say, I don't care what kind of swimmer you are. I don't care if you've surfed your whole life. If you turn your back on the ocean, it will kill you, right? If you don't pay attention when you're jumping out of an airplane at 20,000 feet, you will die, right? If you're in combat, a 9-year-old Somali kid with an AK-47 and a lucky shot can kill a 36-year-old SEAL Team 6 Navy SEAL, right? Yeah. It's just you're always in an environment that will humble you without you even knowing it, without you even wanting to. So you have to maintain a real deep humility about yourself and your teammates and be able to show your teammates exactly who you are, what you are capable of, and what you're there to help them with and what you'd be leaning on them for.
Gosh, no, it's so relevant. The last one is probably one of the most unexpected.
Yeah.
Humor.
Yeah.
Humor. And now you're putting this as an attribute. I'll ask you first to depict how that plays out as a Navy SEAL. And then two, how you see the value of the attribute just in life in general, teams, business, whatever.
Extraordinarily valuable. So it's valuable. So humor is one I, again, moved from in the 9 category version. I moved it from team ability to social intelligence because it is such a bonding quality that helps us as humans bind. There's a reason behind this, but there's also a reason why it's part of the team ability here in the book. It's because I've never experienced a high performing team that doesn't have humor as a part of it. There's a neurological reason for this. So in the book, I talk about SEAL training. I tell a story about in SEAL training in BUDS, you do what's called, they make you do what's called surf torture. Okay. Surf torture is where you all line up on the edge of the surf zone. You link arms, you walk into the surf zone until it's about knee high, and then you turn around and you lay down, right? And you're laying down, the waves are crashing over you and then receding and they're crashing over you. It's the coldest thing you've ever experienced. Because those listeners who know, maybe you know too, that Southern California water is not tropical at all. It's freezing, right? Especially in the winter, It's like in the 50s, okay? So the waves hit you, that's cold. The wind hits you, it's freezing. You're getting water tortured, it's awful, right? So you're in there for hours, or it seems like hours. But a lot of people quit during surf torture. And at some point you do it several times. At one point during one of the times, an instructor will drive a van up onto the beach and get out of the van and with a big megaphone say, "Hey, I have hot chocolate, blankets, and donuts for anybody who quits right now." All right. And you get a lot of people quit it because it's a very tempting offer. Okay. And I remember him doing that to us. We were in there getting surf torture. By the way, my buddy who works at BUDS now, he said, "Hey, Rich, we're not calling it surf torture anymore. We're calling it surf conditioning because it's more politically correct." Right. Anyway, I remember us being in there and that happened. We were miserable and the instructor made his offer. And as soon as he made that offer, the guy on my right arm over here, he yells back at the instructor and he says, "Hey, do you have any chocolate glazed donuts? Because if you don't, I'm not quitting." Right. And as soon as he said that, he laughed and I laughed. Okay. And when I remember laughing, and I remember saying to myself, "Okay, this is not that bad." Right. I felt better. Okay. Meanwhile, I looked over to my left, the guy on my left arm. The guy on my left arm wasn't laughing at all. Right. He was lost in his pain. I don't even think he heard the joke. Okay. And I said to myself, "Ooh, I don't think this guy's going to make it." Right. And sure enough, within about a minute, that guy quit. Okay. Now, what we have to understand when I looked into this is laughing is incredibly powerful neurobiologically. When we laugh, we get juiced with 3 very powerful chemicals. The first one is dopamine. We all heard of dopamine. We've heard of it as a reward chemical. Dopamine is actually a motivation chemical. Dopamine tells us this is good, keep doing this. This is good, keep doing this. Hugely feel-good chemical, right? So we get dopamine. We get endorphins. Endorphins mask our pain, okay? They're the human being's opiate, right? Runner's high is an example of endorphins flooding our system, right? We are endurance creatures because our body floods us with endorphins to keep us going. So we get dopamine, we get endorphins, and finally we get oxytocin. Oxytocin, which is known as the love hormone. It's actually a neurotransmitter, which is a body and brain. It affects both body and brain, but it's the binding chemical of human beings, right? We get huge amounts of oxytocin when we engage in physical contact with other human beings. Even our pets, we get oxytocin. Acts of kindness and generosity produce oxytocin for both the giver and the receiver. In fact, even witnessing an act of kindness and generosity produces oxytocin, right? It binds us and bonds us as human beings. So when we laugh, we get juiced with all 3 of these chemicals without even wanting to, right? It's an involuntary response, right? So I'm in the surf zone, I'm miserable, okay? The instructor makes his crazy offer, right? And my buddy cracks a joke. We both laugh. Suddenly my body says, "This is good. Keep doing this. This doesn't feel that bad. And we're in this together." Okay. It's why it's an incredibly powerful bonding agent for teams, right? It allows us to keep each other together. We connect, we bond, we bind. We know every one of us has experienced with other human beings. The ones we laugh deeply with, we just create bonds with. We really do. It helps us get through the worst situations. The thing I miss most about the SEAL teams was the humor. And it was really dark humor. And we'd be in the worst conditions you could imagine. Some guy would crack a joke and we'd all be laughing, right? And so we have to understand it as powerful. The other thing laughter does, just to harken back to courage, right? We talked about how when we step into our fear, we get a dopamine hit, right? When we laugh, we get a dopamine hit, right? This is why and again, many listeners probably had this experience. You might have had the experience where you were generally anxious or afraid about something. Someone cracks a joke and you genuinely laugh and your fear goes away, right? Because you've just given yourself the same reward as if you've stepped into your fear. Okay, this is the power of laughter, right? So it's huge in the team ability aspect, but it's also huge in the sociability aspect, which is why it's a social intelligence category as well, because it helps bond and bind us with other humans.
Well, it just brings me back. I hadn't thought about it, that they call it comic relief.
Right. And laughter is the best medicine. We hear it all the time, right? You know,
it is interesting. And how many of the movies, I'm trying to think of some of the military ones where they do have, you got that one irreverent character in there making jokes like that, and it makes sense. Or back in wartime when they would bring in a entertainment troupe or whatever, that's what the movie showed us, to change the demeanor. That's interesting. On that, I wanted to ask you this. I was going to ask you this earlier, just for those of us who are listening. I mean, so many people, we're enamored with it. Can't imagine the life that you have lived and the things that you've experienced. And there's no way we're going to in real life. Are there any specific movies that you look at and go, oh, that was fairly true to form, or that had some of the real, that was somewhat realistic? Give us a snapshot.
I would say the one movie that I think is probably the most accurate is probably Zero Dark 30. And I say that because, my buddies who were on that, I was not on that hop, by the way, but my buddies were. I was running training for that command when they were doing it, but it was, they advised it pretty well and they got it pretty right. So that's pretty accurate. I would say the rest of them, it's tough to say, because any movie, as much as they try to be realistic, they have to emphasize the drama stuff and a lot of operations in the military. There's a lot of boredom sometimes, or there's extremes here and there, and they try to truncate these extremes. So yeah, I couldn't, out of all the movies, I'd say that's probably the most accurate one. I don't watch those movies anymore because I get frustrated when I see it. because again, when you live it, you're like, okay, that's just so stupid. I can't watch that, right? But Zero Dark 30, pretty good one.
Yeah, fair. I'll do it, man. Yeah, we could spend the rest of the day talking about stories, I'm sure, and people love to hear this. I don't think I've ever done this. Has there been another show that you've been on where they've gotten you into talking about some of the stories and some of the?
No, because I don't tell war stories. I shouldn't say that. I only tell stories from war if I feel like they are going to be helpful for the audience. And the ones that I do tell have nothing to do with bullet and blood and guns and things like that. There's nothing about the stories that focuses on that aspect of war, because ultimately, I'll tell you, war sucks. It's awful. It's awful for everybody. It's awful for the people who fight it. It's awful for the civilians who live it. It should be avoided at all costs, right? Again, I would say anybody who's been to war, right, who's truly been to war, we're all pacifists now. All my buddies, we're all pacifists. Now we're not like hippy dippy pacifists, because we understand there are bad people who have to be taken to justice, right? But I would say anybody who really talks about the glory of war, right? One of three things is happening. Either one, they're broken. Either two, they are sociopaths. Or three, they're lying about having been there. Okay, it's one of those three things, right? Because if you are none of those three things and you've been to war, then you are someone who says, okay, war sucks, and we should be very deliberate and careful about when we decide to engage human beings in conflict. That's not saying we shouldn't engage in conflict, but we should be very deliberate about it, right? So all this to say, I don't generally talk about it because I don't want it to be a pedestal thing. I just want to try to deliver some value to people. So.
Well, man, you've delivered value. We've been talking for 2.5 hours, and it was significant paradigm shifts, man. I'm eager to put this out and for me to continue and practice my learnability by studying this, man. I love the quiz. And on that, again, we're going to take people, and I'm still recording. So folks, here you go. We're going to be telling people to go to the website and take the quiz. Now, like I took it, so that, you know, if we can hold this or whatever, but if the new one's coming out in May, if you've taken it prior, do you need to retake it again when the new stuff comes out?
You will, because you'll want to get the results. The one that's on there right now is free. The new one will be at cost, but it's only because we're going to provide so much value for someone who's taking it. But it'll provide you with almost a book on how you can actually develop and help your attributes. And if you're a business owner, we do a lot of work with businesses. You can figure that out for your team. You can understand your team's attributes. You can understand how they work together, how they mesh. And a lot of what work we do is we help people figure out the right people to hire. I mean, you want to hire based on attributes as well. And these assessment tools can help you understand, okay, I know I'm not looking for the best typist. I'm looking for the person with the most adaptability, right? I can always teach someone how to type, right? Yeah. I want to make sure I'm preferring attributes over just skills.
All right. Well, I got a question for you. We'll do it off camera. Thank you. Thanks, Rich, for the time, for the paradigm shifts, for the work. I will, attributes is a new headline for me. And I'm a fan of, you know, the quizzes and the profiles and the things that help us. And this will be one at the top of the list. So, man, thank you for what you've done. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your service.
Well, Kevin, thanks for having me. I'm super glad we're friends now, and I look forward to continuing our discussions. We'll have many more, hopefully. So.
Likewise. Thanks.
That was so inspiring, so intriguing. Again, it's Rich Diviney, and his book is The Attributes, 25 Hidden Drivers of Optimal Performance. Now you can go take the quiz, as I did, at hub.theattributes.com. Create an account and then use code Miller15, my last name, Miller15, and you'll get 15% off your own assessment. And I have just grown to have give so much value to assessments overall. There's a time I was critical of them, and now I love them. I love overlapping them. It helps me understand different segments of myself, because I'll take an assessment or a profile or a quiz or whatever and go, okay, gosh, that makes sense in one area, but there's another part of me that seems to not line up, and some other assessment will show me that. So I'm a fan. This is one, again, that is just new to me. Attributes. It's significant as we look at what drives us. I mean, that's the title or the subtitle of his book, The Attributes, 25 Hidden Drivers of Optimal Performance. Friends, I hope this served you well. Again, I'd love to hear your comments on the episode. Email me, kevinmiller@kevinmiller.co. Be great to hear from you. I trust that this show is helping you drive further and enjoy the ride. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey. I look forward to meeting you in the Drive Tribe community for ongoing discussions about each episode. You can subscribe to the Drive Drop newsletter for weekly updates. Find it all at kevinmiller.co, along with all our social media and video clips. Until next time, I hope this episode helps you drive further and enjoy the ride.